Okay, so we've got Susan, Ralph, Mike, Corey, and Francine's not joining us, so we have our quorum. Let's go ahead and get started. Time is 5:33. Let's kick off with a roll call attendance. Corey Evans. Corey, you're unmuted. I'll work my way back to Corey. How about you, Mike? We'll lead with you. Mike Dick.
Mike Dick here.
All right. Susan Franklin.
Susan Franklin here.
Great. Ralph Dormitzer.
Ralph Dormitzer here.
Corey Evans. I can see Corey Evans. I'm not sure that's legal, but we'll call him. Check it. There he is.
Corey Evans here. Sorry about that.
All right, no problem. Thanks, Corey. And Brian Host here. Okay, so time's 5:33. We've gotten started. As I joined, it sounded as though people had received my email and were aware that there's now a CPC meeting scheduled for 7 o'clock to discuss the residential housing component of the One Pleasant Street project. So I guess the first thing well, that's one update. The second update is I did speak with Lance Dial at length today. The school committee is not prepared to join us this evening, but I think we made some progress in terms of perhaps at least the beginning of an understanding of what capital budget is looking for on the feasibility of the project. And so hopefully there's some progress there. He's asked me to pencil them in for next Monday. So those two updates I'm sharing just because I think they impact our agenda for tonight. And I guess the question for the committee before we dive into these stabilization funds, which are the two primary or first orders of business, is, and maybe this is premature, but I guess the question is whether or not people would like to try to attend that CPC meeting at 7, given that we've had, had other items move off the agenda for tonight. Any thoughts?
Well, our work takes priority, but yes, I really want to listen and understand the conversation, understand the different points of view, and certainly see what happens. Depending on whether CPC rescinds or votes no on a reconsideration, that would have an effect on the whole town hall financing, which affects our deliberations.
Right. I also think that a lot of the things that we would probably discuss as a committee amongst ourselves regarding open items surrounding the residential component of that project are probably going to be front and center in this discussion of CPC, would be my guess. And so my instinct is that it would be a little silly for us to stay in our silo and have a conversation amongst ourselves when we could actually listen to, the affordable housing folks who are sort of the resident experts on that stuff, as well as CPC who are funding it, and just see where, what we learn from their discussion, where they land. And, we can pick this up at our next meeting, whether that be Monday or whether people feel like we need to meet sooner, depending on what we hear tonight. So I guess all that's kind of predicated on the idea that we would get through the stabilization fund policies between now and 7 o'clock, which should certainly be our first goal. But if we do that, given schools isn't here, I think really the next thing is to revisit town hall. So maybe we just pipe over to that meeting. Any other thoughts?
Makes sense. I'm not sure how much we'll learn on the town hall project with CPC. I think because CPC is just going to reconsider something, but we'll see. I do think we should be watching that. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, the affordable housing folks, we're invited. So it could be no conversation. It could be a very fruitful conversation. I just have no idea. All right. So why don't we go ahead and dive in? And I'm going to apologize both in retrospect and in advance for the fact that, the reality is, we're marking up a document here, which is soon going to become a policy of the town. I don't know of a pretty way to do this, and I don't know an effective way to do it offline without breaking up a meeting law. So, here we are, and we're going to trudge our way through this and try and make this the best policy that it can be. I do want to encourage people to, at least for purposes of this drafting conversation, to take, really two questions and just take them off to the side. The first is, whether or not you'd vote for this as a tax increase under any circumstance. The reality is this is coming before us. And, even before we take a vote, we need to make this policy the best that it can be, because no matter what our votes are, there's a possibility this becomes the policy of the town. So, I think, we should do our best to make this the most functional document it can be. To the extent that people want a sunset, we need to recognize that we can suggest that, but select board, may or may not adopt that. And I'm not even going to speculate. It doesn't really matter because they're going to do what they're going to do. But let's just do the best we can to make this a policy that can be functional for the town, under the assumption that it gets voted through. Then with that, let's just dive in. There were a bunch of I think issues that came up in our discussion last week with regards to structurally how these stabilization funds work. And I know, Corey, you did some research on that, and I know, Susan, you also did some research on that. Before we try to put any type of edit in here, does it make sense to just spend a few minutes getting an update on what the two of you learned, and whether or not any of the concerns were assuaged as a result of your research?
Yeah, I mean, Susan, happy to jump in, or you're off camera, so if you're busy, I'll jump in.
No, it's just my video is not working for some.
Okay, then you start, please.
Well, I think it's a little unclear because there was a change in the structure from originally the town was the voting entity to modify things, but it looks like that has been changed to your legislative body being your select board. So
Isn't the legislative body the town meeting?
well, that's what I thought too, but then it keeps referring to your select board further in the document, which is that to me is still the biggest question, because I'm with the construct of a stabilization fund, and based on some of the research I've done, it's been a very well utilized tool by certain towns, and the way they describe why towns decide to put these funds in place in the first place is that things have gotten a little towns maybe weren't maintaining things well, and they kind of get themselves into a situation where they're playing a bit of catch up. So that is a circumstance that we recognize that we have. But that was the one thing I kept coming across, was that in one getting this right out of the Department of Revenue site, and in that one, it looked as though the townspeople could have the vote to appropriate how much is going into the budget. But then in the latter version, the verbiage changed to say that the town can vote to say that they want to utilize those funds in a certain way, but not necessarily change the level of appropriation. That's
Susan, it's Brian. I apologize, but your sound has broken up in such a way that I'm not sure I completely caught the summary of the key point. When you circle back to this key point of who has what controls, if you could possibly I don't know, pull closer or whatever and repeat that might be, or move and repeat that could be helpful.
okay. So the first informational guideline release that I found was from July of 2017. And in that one, the legislative body is described as the town people. And it says that they take two-thirds of the vote to determine how much is appropriated year to year to the fund. So remember we talked about, Corey had that language where the last appropriation becomes the basis for the future appropriations and for the 2.5% increase.
Yep.
All right, but then I later found another version that was dated. It's probably in my email. One second. And it was dated, I think, 2019. But in that one, the definition seemed to have changed to the legislative body being your select board, whatever your town board is.
Susan, your audio is completely unintelligible. Are you close to a microphone? Sometimes it comes in very clear, and then other times it feels like your microphone.
This is my laptop. I can switch to my desktop, I guess.
That might be worthwhile, Susan.
Okay, I just happen to have my laptop up and running, so I thought I'd just.
Okay, or even your phone if you have better reception, although that may be a comical comment given it's Cohasset.
And it's raining. That usually impacts it. Let me bring it up on my desktop and see if that helps.
All right. So while Susan's doing that, I'll just what I found with the town of Medfield is basically the process for this, which clarified my misunderstandings, and it kind of falls in line more with what Mr. Senior was telling us the last meeting, which is once this basically, I mean, the tick, it's a TikTok format, right? So the stabilization fund is passed. After the first year, the select board, with a select board motion, it is funded, as that's the tick, and the appropriation to a specific project is the talk, happens at town meeting. So every year that this fund has been existing, the town of Medfield has had a select board motion to fund the fund at X times 0.25% plus 2.5%. And then at town meeting, they will then apply the funding to the normal capital appropriation process to the projects. They have, even though the fund, I think, started with $1 million and it's growing every year, some years are doing less than $1 million, some years are doing more than $1 million, but the funding level for the fund, when it goes into the fund, is determined by the select board every year, and that is, they're doing it just as a routine motion, which is probably, I think, what this committee should expect to happen, unless there's some movement on the voter side or political will for the select board to no longer do the maximum. So that is how Medfield is doing it.
Okay, and Corey, are they escalating it on routinely at 2.5 a year?
Yeah, it is. They are. Yeah, even though they're not spending all that amount, the select board is appropriating in for tax purposes 2.5 more a year.
Okay, and then did I hear you correctly that in terms of the appropriations out of the fund going to specific spend items or project items are sometimes more and sometimes less than the appropriation in? So this is fundamentally being used as, I mean, you call it a stabilization fund, but it's really more, sounds like it's almost more of a revolving fund for them, and probably would be for us, at least in terms of the roads.
Yeah, sure. I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Money in, money out.
Correct. But the takeaway was that the discussion for the money, there doesn't seem to be any discussion on the money in, which that it it's part of the levy, and it just
yeah,
they're only 5 years into it. So and they also were faced with a staggering amount of deferred maintenance on capital projects. So maybe they're not there yet, but that's just how it's been working for them.
Okay, so it's not part of the levy per se, but it just does happen.
Correct.
Okay, like the levy every year, it goes up 2.5%.
Yeah.
Okay, and Ralph, you were going to say something.
Yeah, quick understanding then. In other words, once the tax increase goes in as a result of the stabilization fund, it really is there indefinitely as you read it, and it can go up 2.5%. It doesn't have to be spent every year, but nevertheless, it accumulates over time as long as the select board authorizes that each year that fund should remain at least at the level it was the previous year. Is that essentially correct?
Yeah, so I would just rephrase it a little bit to say it's not automatic, but it is set up so that the barrier to extending the fund is low. Okay. Is that a fair reassessment, right? So barring real pressure on the select board or some sort of pressure from other directions, the fund will continue to grow.
Okay, thanks.
It's effectively a confirmatory annual vote by the select board, and
well,
they can turn it off, but they can't. Okay, and really, what the expectation is, it's there every year. It goes up by 2.5% a year. Absent select board decision not to.
Okay.
Okay,
But I'm confused by one part of the mechanism. And that is if the balance is not appropriated by town meeting. I might be,
Grows. If we don't spend it at town meeting, it stays in the fund.
okay, that's not the question I'm trying to get.
Oh, sorry,
get
Mike.
to. No, it's me trying to understand the mechanism. Let me try it again. If there is $1 million in there and it goes up by 2.5%. If $1.2 million is not appropriated the following year, then the next 2.5% increase is based on 0 because nothing was appropriated. Or if some figure less than the balance was appropriated, the 2.5% is calculated on what was appropriated, not what the balance is.
So for into the fund, so not the town meetings, so with the select board motion to appropriate into the fund, the two scenarios are, as you described it, one, it's less than the three scenarios. First scenario is it's 2.5 larger than the previous year. Second scenario is that it's a less amount of money, which then resets the 2.5 growth. The third scenario is that the appropriation does not occur, which to my understanding puts a pause on the fund. So the fund would then, if it does come back, it can only come back at 2.5 more than the last time it was used.
Okay, so I want to make this observation and tell me if you think I've got this right or if I'm off. It sounds to me that this process, this policy, encourages spending. That in order to keep your fund robust, you should be appropriating a lot of money out of it because you will not be allowed to replenish that fund to its full extent.
So no,
If you appropriate less.
but that's into it. So if no money was appropriated out of it at town meeting, the fund would just grow. So the select board could appropriate in $1 million and then $1 million math, plus 2.5%, and then at town meeting never spend the money. So you could collect, $5.x million over 5 years of cash in this fund if that was what the select board wanted to do and the people were okay with it.
See, this is where I'm confused.
But that's the point where the town can also vote to use the money for another purpose.
Yes.
so Michael's still confused. Let's just go back and then let's circle back to your point, Susan, about the town being able to vote to use the money for a different purpose. All right. So Michael, you're confused. Just
Yes.
listening to the back and forth between you and Corey, it appears to me that you're focused on the 2.5 mechanism and the taxing calculation as somehow linked to the spending appropriation. And I believe what I'm hearing from Corey and what I've read independently is that the two are not linked at all.
Correct.
That's right.
That's what I believe, but maybe someone has other information. But I'm going to paraphrase what I think I heard Corey say and what I think I've read.
Yeah.
At least in the briefing materials on this provided by our town, which is there's an annual tax to fund the fund. Okay. It's initially set with a vote at town meeting. Whether you spend it or not, the next year, the select board will have a vote to either, increase the fund by 2.5%, leave the fund flat, or decrease the funding level, by some amount. But this is a new incremental year's worth of tax. So the select board has the ability to set the new tax level the next year, but the highest they can go is up 2.5%. They can go all the way down to 0 if they want. Okay. And that just continues until, either the select board takes it to 0 and leaves it there, or some other action to make this mechanism go away entirely. And that funding mechanism has nothing to do with how they actually spend the money, which is a separate issue. And I think that's what I've read. Is that, Corey,
The question I would raise therefore is, what if the select board, using the word appropriation to mean appropriation into the fund, not appropriation out, appropriation in.
Right.
What if they take no action whatsoever in the second year? What happens?
In the second year, I think Susan found this out. If in the first 3 years you have to do it, I don't think you can pause. But for argument's sake, if it's like year 4 and they don't do anything, then if they wanted to redo it, they would have to do it it would pause the fund. It wouldn't close the fund.
Right.
Okay, but the money would accumulate, do you think, Corey? The money accumulates irrespective.
Yes, correct. So there's rules. All the chapter whatever means that, it has to follow all the investment things that the town of Cohasset would normally. So yeah, it'd be an account that would be growing in interest and in whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
and just Corey and Susan, given you found this, when we say that, the select board has to continue this for 3 years, is there any restriction on how they continue it? In other words, I assume that they have the right to, or the discretion, to either increase it by 2.5, run it flat at 0 year after, at the same level year after year, or maybe even decrease it. I think what I hear you saying is you just can't undo the mechanism, which kind of leaves open the possibility, the one really weird question, could they cut it in half if they wanted to in the first 3 years? Not that would happen, but
That would mean a tax decrease, in other words. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, practically speaking, my concern with this is the understanding that maybe there's something bigger coming down the line in any of these things, right?
Yeah.
And having the flexibility to reduce the tax load on the residents in order for the purposes of a different project, I think is a great flexibility. So, if there is a large school project that comes down the pike, I think it's reasonable to expect that the stabilization fund funding would understandably go down. If we're doing a big project and we're catching up a lot of stuff, so my practical questions here were because of, okay, can there be trading in the future to limit the impact of taxpayers? And yes, there can. I don't think there's going to be any chance that in the first 3 years, this is going to be, we're not going to be caught up for schools, that's for sure. With roads, I'm not, probably not either. So I don't think that's even it's not really a practical concern for me about the first 3 years. Did I just say something that didn't make any sense?
No.
no, as a practical matter, I completely agree with you.
Big part of it.
So circling back to Michael, I mean, we were, I think, what we were trying to do first was to address the perhaps the confusion around the funding in and whether or not it was connected to the funding out. Michael, did this discussion make any progress in clarifying that?
No, because it doesn't square with what I thought I read, and I'm trying to find the document. It was, I believe, something that Susan sent around, and I've been going through my emails right now trying to find it, but it was a really nice overview that was from the Town of Medfield webpage, but it looked like it was a state document.
Yeah, the town, Medfield linked to the state. So that's kind of why I went into Medfield's. I went back.
I can't find that link again. That's what I'm looking for. I want to go to that section, but I also don't want to hold us up.
So Michael, what I did is I went through all the town meetings, back to the establishment and the funding of it. I went back and I found the minutes from the select board. I just literally connected the dots in a linear fashion for how they're exercising the fund. Maybe they're doing it wrong, but they seem to have their.
Here's my concern. And that is, it looks to me like the mechanism is set up to appropriate as much as possible every year to keep the growth in the stabilization fund at its maximum. That's what I'm coming away with, and I'm trying to find that language that makes me think that. It seems like it's in the way the mechanism works is spend it, because if you don't spend it, you're not going to get as much next year.
There's no link on the spend side. And the growth rate is at the select board's discretion with a max 2.5% growth.
I look at it more from the first time you vote it, because that's when you're setting, the basis.
Okay.
So this fund that, they're asking us to set it, is it 800? I'm sorry, I don't have my notes right now. 800,000 a year?
Yep.
Yeah. So
For the
that's
roads.
that's gonna be the basis that everything's gonna move from, going forward, unless to Michael's point, the select board decides not 1 year to appropriate into the fund.
I mean, holistically, these funds will then be part of the budget message, right? I mean, and budgetary policy, which, should include feedback from all committees and advisory ourselves as well for capital appropriation. And, that is, there's a lot of politicking, a lot of discussion that happens about that every year. So the select board could, as a policy, say, consistent with previous years, we're increasing this fund, or, seeing that our spend has gone down, we've paused it, or we've whatever.
Right.
I mean, that'll be part of the normal process about how the select board creates its budget.
Folks, I did find that document. If you like, I can share, or I can just read it to you. Do you want me to share the screen?
Sure.
Okay.
So it's always easier to look at text so that we understand what, the specific lines that are in focus.
So this is a state document, Department of Local Services. How is that showing up on your screens? Is it showing up?
Yeah, looks fine to me. Others?
Yeah,
Great.
it's good.
Michael,
Yeah,
can you
we
go to
did.
the top of it though? Because I want to see the date on it.
2016.
Yeah.
It's been changed a bunch since
Things
then.
have changed since then. That's the
Yeah.
point I was trying to make.
Okay, well,
Some of it's the same though, but
all right. Well, let me go to what is catching me. All right, let's just start here. The additional levy capacity by this type of override increases by 2.5% each year. After the first year, the selectmen or city council may appropriate less than the originally approved amount. However, the lower amount then becomes the max that can be raised in subsequent years, plus 2.5% annual escalation.
Yep.
And that's what's tripping me up, because it would seem to me that you would not want to appropriate less than the originally approved amount.
So here's how I'm reading this, and maybe you're reading it differently. Okay, let's just take our case. Our town's talking about, in the case, and let's just focus on the roads. Let's set aside the schools for a second. Talking about an 800,000 a year starting point. Okay, so year 2. Okay, the additional levy capacity that can be appropriated or raised by this override increases by 2.5% each year. So in year 2, it's 800,000. Okay, plus whatever the select board, plus or minus whatever the select board decides, but the maximum it can be increased is 2.5% a year. So it's 800,000 plus an additional 2.5% the next year. Okay, and it doesn't matter whether they spend the money or not. That's just the tax, and that money goes into the fund.
All right, then let me read this next paragraph to you.
But actually, let me just finish one more point.
Okay,
Now,
sure.
let's just say, in year 4, or let's just say in year 2, they say, okay, we don't want to do up 2.5. We're going to go up 0. So that next year, it's, year 2, it's whatever the year 1 number was, plus no incremental growth. Let's say it's flat 8%, flat 800,000. It would just go flat. Now, the third scenario is, let's say they actually took it down, right? This is the however, right? So they may appropriate less than the originally approved amount. So let's just say they decide randomly 1 year up, we're going to drop this to 500,000. That becomes the new starting point for any future growth cap. So you know, say in year 5, they drop it to 500 grand. Year 6, it can only be 500 grand plus 2.5%.
Agreed, and that's my point.
Is how I read it. Yeah.
Right. The incentive is to spend it.
No one's, I haven't said anything about spending. This money could just be piling up in the fund right now. It has nothing to do with spending.
The incentive, Michael, I think the rephrase is there's an incentive to keep it growing. Right? I mean, that's if you want the fund to
Right.
keep
The
growing.
incentive is to keep the taxes increasing, and that's where I'm concerned.
Okay, look, I want to get back to the beginning point on this. You know, our roads are a forever spend, and they're going to forever increase in cost. So this is, you know,
I mean,
people need to understand that this is being set up as a forever tax increase, and you should expect that it is going to go up by 2.5% a year. The only thing that would change that is really one of two things. Either we got into this a couple of years and serendipity, we found out it was too much money, so then they dropped the number, which I think is pretty unlikely given, you know, costs tend to run higher, not lower. Or number two, you know, there's an agreement up front that in fact, you know, somehow they're going to squeeze this spend, you know, back into the back into the annual budget.
Yep.
Okay. Most likely by, you know, capping growth in FTEs, right? Like that's the only two things that can happen.
well, also, and just speaking from my previous, you know, seat in this town, you know, I didn't find that there's a, you know, the select board is, I think would, you know, leans, in my opinion, towards not raising taxes, right? So, I mean, obviously the tax grows, but I don't think there's a built-in assumption that the select board will be always wanting to maximize this. You will have, you know, those that get elected that want to reduce this or eliminate it or, you know, put some rails on. I mean, taxes are, you know, the select board hears from the voters about how the tax money is being spent. So, you know, I think I'm not saying it's an equal amount of pressure, but the select board certainly, I don't think would feel any obligation or incentive to continue escalating this against political headwinds. I just, you know, from what I've seen before. So, you know, each department maybe, but, you know, even then, I'm not overly concerned about that kind of scenario where there's an incentive for anybody. I mean, there's no incentive for the select board to continue to raise taxes. There is an incentive for the select board to reduce the tax load, and this is a way they could do that. Unlike operating budget where you'd have to fire people. So that's where I kind of land on that.
Would someone comment also on the other point, which is when does the select board have the option to actually change the purpose of the fund, and does it have an option to change the purpose of the fund, and are they the sole arbiter of that question?
No, the only people that can change the fund is town meeting and a ballot question. So it's effectively doing the whole thing again, but you, instead of starting from a zero fund balance, you're starting from a positive fund balance. But it's effectively the same process to create one as it is to reappropriate one, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm on the spend side here. If the money is not spent specifically for the purpose for which it was created, is there an opportunity for the select board to say, we have not spent, let's say, this $1 million we appropriated, we appropriated into the fund, but we spent $500,000 on, for example, let's say a new roof for one of the buildings, and $500,000 is left over. Do they have the right after the first year to take that other $500,000 and apply it to any other expenditure, such as a new backhoe, for example, for the DPW?
As I understand it, no, because
No.
remember, any expenditures still have to go in front of town meeting.
Well,
So the select board-
understand
yeah.
that. That doesn't change the question. It only changes what they, in fact, recommend. Can they recommend something other than the purpose for which it was funded?
I don't believe so. I believe it's very clear on that you cannot, if it's not the purpose of the fund, if you want to change the purpose, if you want to modify the fund, you have to go through the entire process again, including a ballot initiative.
Which raises the question, what is it that defines the purpose of the fund? I mean, I suppose part of it is the warrant language.
Yeah.
Because that's what people voted on. I mean, to some degree, it's the policy, but the policy can be changed.
Policy is a guideline, right? It's not.
The policy is a guideline. So, am I missing something? Is it really just the warrant language
And the ballot question. Yeah.
It's the ballot question. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's right. It is the ballot question. So some combination of the two, certainly the ballot.
It would be the motion, guys. We don't even know what the motion says.
No, it would still be the ballot because the motion on a ballot question, you can't modify the ballot question at town meeting, right? The ballot question's already been printed. That's one of the risks they ran by printing the ballot before town meeting. The ballot is fixed. So if there's a if one of the things don't pass town meeting, that question is voided. But if it passes in such a way that makes the ballot question useless, it's also voided. So there's really not the same flexibility as a normal warrant article in this case, because the ballot question is already set. It's printed, it's delivered to people. It can't be changed.
And it's also the final say, right? So this could
Right.
pass town meeting but fail at the ballot. It doesn't matter what was in the warrant, right?
Right.
And similarly, could pass both places. It also doesn't matter what was said in the warrant, really. The operative is going to be the ballot question. Is that the right way to think about it?
Correct.
Okay. Is the ballot on the town website?
I got it delivered the other day. It should be on the town website.
Okay. I mean, I presume we're not voting this tonight, but we can circle back to that. But it sounds like each of us needs to read the ballot question. Do we want to do that independently, or do we want to pull it up right now and read it just so we know what the ballot question says and we get comfort on, that, Ralph's point, which is this money actually adequately ring fenced?
Well, are you talking about the warrant article, or are you
Talking about the ballot.
the ballot? Does the ballot? We have the ballot? I haven't seen it.
There's a sample ballot listed on the webpage.
Is that a sample or is that a final, Michelle?
Let me look. I believe it's a final.
Well, I guess it's a sample. I know it's not an official, but is that is it a
It's a
draft
final.
ballot or is that the final ballot? Is probably
I've got
better
the final
question.
here.
It's the final.
It's the final.
Yeah, I'll do a quick
Does
one.
somebody have the ability to pull it up on the screen here so we can all look at it together?
I got it, Michelle. Unless you want to do it.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
No, mine is a very low res version. Do you have the high res version?
Mine might be the same, but hang on, let me share it and see if you can see it.
Oh, I've got it. Found it.
Yeah.
It says sample that way someone can't print it off and file it. It's not because it's invalid. But this matches exactly with what I have here. Sorry.
Okay. So really what it says specifically is a school capital stabilization fund on question 3.
Mhm.
And question 4 is a roads and sidewalks capital stabilization fund. So, I mean, the word capital in there means to me not operating budget. And, given that we've got school in one and roads and sidewalks in the other, it seems pretty restrictive in terms of ring fencing it. How do other people feel about this? Does this address your concern, Ralph?
Well, specifically, it defines it as for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023, that's a limiting statement. That is a very limiting statement, whatever that means. And I'm not saying I do know, I don't know. My instinct on this is what I've read, and I tried to read all of the statute on this, is there is an opportunity to take that money in future years by simply a vote of the select board to apply it to other things if there's a surplus. So this one is limiting, and it says for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023. In other words, it has no, it isn't a in perpetuity or any other such words, or for the next 3 years or any other language like that. This is one which has open-ended the time frame, except for its explicit beginning July 1st. So this may go to the real question is what happens in year 2? They probably have to then bring before the voters again an article which says that this is again the spending into the fund, that they intend to continue this fund in future years. They probably have to do it every year by look at this. But I don't know. I just can't tell.
Can you see my screen now? So
They do have to do it every year.
they do. So Ralph, I think what you keyed upon is this section here, the
Yep.
changing.
Yep.
However, right, this paragraph here.
Yep.
If it was a levy override for the purpose, the city or town must follow the election procedure as explained to change the fund purpose.
Yep.
So
Yep.
in a normal stabilization fund, the select board does have the ability to reappropriate it, but not if it was a levy limit override.
Okay. So that's the specific distinction. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and Schedule 3C is literally what we're talking about, which is
Can you go back to the ballot for a second?
sure.
That unfortunately is a limiting statement. As if you don't, you have to read that as it is their agreement to make this fund specific for the purpose of the school stabilization is for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023. Says it directly. So there has to be every year something has to happen in order for this thing to be continued. In other words, it's not like a general override, which would just simply increase the tax rate.
Right. Yeah. It's both the same and different.
Yeah.
It's it's a democracy, the Chinese characteristics.
Yeah, right.
So Ralph, your point is that this is, as you read this ballot, it's only good for 1 year, because when you go and actually read how these stabilization funds work, once they're put in place, they do repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my understanding of this whole thing is they will repeat as long as the select board votes to continue it each year. That's what I believe is correct. However,
Yes.
I think they can change the purpose. Although I saw what you gave to you put up, Corey. I understand what you put up, but my instinct on this is probably they do have some liberty to actually change the money out and how it gets used. I think the money goes in and stays in. They just continue to authorize the money to go in at a 2.5% increase. So they have to do that every year. That's the levy in. And the levy out, though, is a little bit dicier, but I know what you showed us. So I'm not sure what to make of it. But anyway, it may be, from my perspective, this is because of the misunderstandings, this is not going to be clear to any voter by the time they get to the ballot or even at town meeting. So no matter what anyone says.
Yeah. What I'm wrestling with here is on the ballot. There's nothing here that distinguishes, either in question 3 or in question 4. There's nothing here that distinguishes this stabilization fund that we're actually setting up as actually being a special stabilization fund, a special purpose stabilization fund.
Yeah, it doesn't cite the actual statute.
So
Right.
the words aren't in there, and the statute's not cited. There's nothing on this ballot
That's right.
that locks me into in what you just showed us, Corey, in terms of.
No, I agree
PLC
that
40.
this reads as a one-time capital raise, right? I mean, it does not, the ballot question is nothing about it continuing on or creation of. I mean, that's a question for council and the town manager about if this is the proper format for this.
Michelle, is it my understanding that these things already, we are already past deadline in terms of the ballot?
They're past deadline, they're in people's homes.
Okay. So this
Michelle,
is what we're voting on.
Was
This
this
is
question
definitely a
just-
question for council that needs clarified, because I agree with Ralph's observation that this reads like a 1-year special capital override, and there's absolutely nothing that locks this into the restrictions of a special purpose stabilization fund in this ballot vote.
Just so you guys know, this is the exact language that's in the DLS recommended form.
It is, okay.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, maybe I'm seeing ghosts, but I can also read English. I can see what's there and what's not there.
Yeah.
I just want to see what Medfield did here.
I mean, maybe it's because it's a combination of this. Well, I don't know, this plus the warrant. I don't know. I don't know what it is in this language that would cause any legal restriction tied to this being a special purpose stabilization fund. I mean, it's just not there.
I think that gets to the point I was making about the first vote is really you're establishing the construct with that first vote. And then after that, you're really just voting on how the money is used.
Right. So what you're saying, Susan, is that the language actually is in the warrant. And once that warrant passes town meeting, then this ballot question references that school capital stabilization fund that was on the warrant.
Well, if you read the actual language in the warrant, it says that they will assess an additional 800,000 or said sum in real estate and personal property taxes for said purpose pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 59, Section 21C of the Massachusetts General Laws, Prop 2.5. In other words, it's quite specific there. Yeah.
But it doesn't reference that Chapter 40, I think Section 5 for stabilization funds?
No, it just references Chapter 59, Section 21C, Mass General Laws, Prop 2.5, or take any other action relative thereto.
Well, that's awesome.
Well, Ralph.
Yeah.
You're reading the article? Because I see
I'm reading
Chapter 40, Section B in the first sentence.
Yeah, it mentions chapter, true, in the first sentence, Chapter 40B, Section 5B, to create. It's the creation of it. Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's created on the warrant, and the ballot basically funds it through a tax increase.
That's right. The warrant is just saying we're going to create this fund, but if it doesn't get voted on the ballot, then nothing happens.
Yeah, and Susan's point is completely right. This is the exact language from DLS.
Both on the ballot and the warrant, Corey?
DLS
just
had
the ballot.
Language.
Yeah, they didn't talk about the warrant article.
Let me
But I
sorry.
can find-
warrant.
I must say, legally, this is a very sloppy set of processes, the worst I've ever seen. You really, the ballot question should reference the same statutes as the warrant article does. This is not, I mean, I understand this is what the state recommends for language, but quite frankly, it would seem that's challengeable as for language. If someone didn't go to the town meeting, but was going to vote, they would not exactly understand what they're doing here. So anyway.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Ralph, and I think that's why a lot of towns have been very careful on their websites and how they present their stabilization funds.
Yeah, and only three towns have done it so far, whatever it is, something like that.
Oh, no, quite a few.
Actually, like 20 something.
the general use seems to be for schools and roads, and then there's a few special purpose ones for, you know, fire equipment or ambulance equipment, but schools and roads seems to be the primary use.
I see. Okay.
So there's a couple of comments here, Brian.
Please.
From Jean, and she's just stating that our lawyers weighed in on it. It's the ballot plus the warrant. The warrant articles reference chapter 40, section 5B in the statutory tax site. The ballot language is set by DLS. And then she went on to say the select board asked to expand and explain the ballot questions in more detail. And our lawyers recommended no per the DLS requirements. Chris is also going to hop on if you have any additional questions.
Okay.
I mean, it kind of is what it is, right? I mean, it's also a little bit, you know, I agree with a lot of the sentiment here, but at the same time, that's kind of up to the select board to explain to the people exactly how this works in a way that they're comfortable with. So
it also sounds like we're not entirely insane on this matter. I mean, the select board had the same issue and approached council for
exactly.
additional language.
Yep. Correct. Yeah. So if they're aware of it and they're going to address it, I mean, again, it's their, you know, they have to address this to the town. So if they're aware of it and they're going to address it, you know.
Okay. So I'm just trying to reconcile this independently in my head as well. And here's kind of what I'm coming around to. Both these questions refer to, you know, the first one says the school stabilization fund or the school capital stabilization fund, uppercase. Okay. So that's a thing. It has meaning, right? So where do you find the definition of the school capital stabilization fund? You find that definition in the warrant, right?
Yes. It's
And
not
in
a
the
capital
warrant where it's
improvement.
defined as a special purpose stabilization fund, which therefore links back to the legal guardrails of GLC 45B, which 40-5B, which Corey, you had up earlier, which says, you can't change the purpose of it.
Yep.
So it's kind of I mean, I agree with you, Rob. It's always nicer to just like have it be clear in one place, right on the ballot. But when I actually follow the defined terms, they lead me to the restriction.
Well, and the same thing is true with the other ballot questions. I mean, the ballot questions don't, for the debt exclusion, don't mention an amount, right? So that's,
yeah.
The ballot questions I think are designed to be fairly lightweight for, better or worse, whatever the opinion on that is.
Mhm.
I mean, if I were to give a net summary, it's that we're not nuts about the language, but this is the correct language per DLS process, and it does lead to the restriction that the money can't be repurposed. But I guess I mean that's my recap of what I think we just sort of noodled through. I guess my question is, do other people feel like they arrived at the same conclusion?
I have.
Yeah, me too. I mean, if it's legally set up within the bounds of mass law, we could have problems with mass law, but I mean, that's not the fault. There's no fault to this fund for those things.
Michael, Ralph, did you guys actually get there, or do we want to spend more time on this or other issues?
No, there's no point in spending any more time. At least for me, there's no point in spending any more time. It's more fundamental as to whether or not this is the right thing to do. So, yeah.
Look, that is a huge question. I don't want to ignore the 1,000-pound, elephant in the. It's not a 1,000-pound elephant. There's no such thing.
That'd be a
1,000-pound
steaming
gorilla in
elephant.
the room, but right now we just want to understand the mechanics of this and make sure that that it's set up to at least do what it is that the folks who created it intended.
Yeah.
And as we would like it to function if in fact it were to pass, with or without our support. Okay. Okay. So that, I think that chunk of time was just spent really addressing, the question of whether or not the money can be repurposed and making sure that it can't.
Ryan, I have not had a chance to answer your question that you asked
Please.
about for myself. I am a layperson. I don't follow this. I find many problems in the mechanism and what difficulties the town may face down the road. I appreciate the fact that other towns are doing it successfully. And I keep coming back to try it out in a smaller scale first and see how we do. And certainly put a sunset on it for this trial period and then move forward rather than committing our town's taxpayers to a very large tax increase for a mechanism that we don't understand fully yet. We're still asking questions. And I feel badly for Chris or others who are going to try and explain this on the floor of town meeting and not run into the same kinds of confusion or puzzlement that I feel. So that's where I land. Thanks.
Okay, let me ask, because I don't want to just blow right by this. You know, recognizing that what's being proposed is not a trial period, and that may be a non-starter for you, but that's the reality of what's in front of us, right? It's what's in the warrant, it's what's, you know, on this ballot. In that context, and not ignoring your very real feelings on whether or not this is the right thing to do, you know, structurally, do you feel that this conversation has given you clarity with regards to the taxing mechanism?
I still am unsure about the incentive to authorize spending out of the funds in order to maintain a high level or a higher balance. I'm still not clear on whether I'm right or wrong. And I hear everything you said, Brian, and I'm just not getting it. I apologize. But from what I've read, it's and maybe I'm reading the 2016 version, and maybe I should have the current version in front of us to make a better judgment.
So Mike, when you explain things, like I don't find any fault with how you explain things. So like I feel like when you said things, they've been fairly accurate. Is the hang up basically who is exercising that mechanism? Because it is if it is the select board's motion in a normal public meeting that establishes the level of funding for the fund, not the expenditures. So if the select board is the one in their motion for next fiscal year makes it lower, it triggers that sentence that you're looking at. So, but it's under the authority of the select board. It's under their purview to set what the taxing amount is per year. The taxing amount is not connected to how much town meeting votes to spend out of the fund. Does that help at all?
Well, I still see the risk of an incentive to increase taxes in order to maintain a high balance in the fund.
So the select board would have to, so the incentive would come from, let's just say the people that want to get stuff done, right? And maybe that was a little too positive. The people that have projects that they want that are important to them. There we go. But the select board is set up to be 30,000 feet in the air. And the select board may not agree, just like they don't on a lot of stuff. Now so, and the advisory committee may not agree. That's a little bit in reverse, but I don't think that the select board, there isn't a built-in incentive for the select board to collect more money from people by default.
I think I'm worried because what we have in front of us are 4 very large tax increases.
Well, for this board, right? But one thing that makes me, every time a board member comes to this committee and talks about, well, we could do this, it's like, I'm reminded that boards are short. Every year you get a new board, and 2 of the 3 members can change over with very different priorities. And if it is clear that this fund is being mismanaged or it is being spent improperly, we're going to hear that at town meeting. And then you're going to see that when it comes to who is running for the board. And if somebody could run a single issue campaign to say, I want to get the money back in people's pockets rather than having it, being burned on these buildings. I'm being pejorative here. And they may be elected, and that may be all that's necessary. Because I think the select board is, the incentive to the select board is to respond to people, whether or not it feels that way. I just, there's real pressure. So if the people really feel that this has gotten out of hand, the select board, I would expect, would respond to that, or somebody else will step up and be voted in that would respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Another question that I think is still unanswered is the notion that the select board is the legislative body. Does that need an answer from the town council? Because we've seen language that Corey has shared on his screen that references the legislative body shall have responsibility. And just from my layperson's standpoint, I've always understood that it's our town meeting that's the legislature, and that the select board can be considered the executive. So I'd like to see that clarified, certainly, wouldn't you?
So in the latest language of the fund, select boards are carved out and specifically mentioned. And then I think the second part, though, which is carved out, which is the appropriating authority, is town meeting. So the select board can vote to collect the money, but they can't vote to spend it, because that still lies in town.
The language that you showed us when we were going through Ralph's concern about changing the fund's purpose, what I read there on screen was that the legislative body is the group that will change the purpose. And I think it's right, absolutely right and proper that it should be town meeting versus a select board that would have the power to change the fund purpose.
Yep. So Mike, the way that I have come to read it after reading a lot of different versions is that the select board comes to you with the construct of creating this fund under the Massachusetts guidelines and, manage it that way. And you vote on that one time as a body, a town body. And once you agree to that 2.5% increase, the select board can, say they want to keep maintaining it at that level, as originally funded. And it doesn't require another vote. If they want to change the use of it, it would require a vote. And if you want to spend the money in the fund, it requires a vote on how those funds are spent.
Yeah, so this is the language from that document, Michael, that you just referenced, which is each year thereafter, the select board, town council, or city council must decide whether to appropriate, and that's in the additional capacity of the override. So that's how they've carved that out for the select board to do so.
Actually, what I was referring to was that section that Ralph was concerned with, which is changing the purpose.
Yeah, so because this fund was created as an override, changing the purpose can only be done through an override.
Okay.
So the select board can continue to grow the fund only for its own purpose. The select board does not have the authority to change the purpose of the fund or reappropriate the money to other things.
Right, but the
Without the town,
language
right.
in the document you've shown us is that the legislative body has that control. And where we have not resolved, I think, the question, is the select board considered the legislative body, and do they have that power to change the purpose as a legislative body?
No, they're not. No, so they're not. They cannot change the purpose of the fund. They are not the quote unquote legislative body. But this,
I thought I heard earlier in our deliberations that the select board could be considered the legislative body. Have we resolved that question? Is that asked and answered?
No, I'm not quite. My apologies if I'm trying to, because I think the struggle here is that they're carving out the select board and giving it an authority, even though it is not a quote unquote legislative body. I mean, this is, So for the purposes of this, yes, they can do it on their own. For the purposes of creating or adjusting, they are not a legislative body. So the only authority the select board has is to set the funding amount of this fund in years going forward. They can't change the purposes. They can only make it grow, make it stop, or make it smaller.
Okay. I just want to note that Jean put in a comment in the Q&A. Where'd it go?
12. Yeah, 12,000.
Please go ahead and read it.
I'm struggling with bringing it up.
I have it. 12 towns have voted to create these funds, sometimes numerous times.
Okay, so it's 12, the number of towns that have. There's another one. Our lawyers,
Yeah, that was about the ballot question.
yeah.
That's one Michelle read to us.
okay. So,
So Mike, I'm looking at the more updated version of that
yeah,
July 7th, the February 2016. This is where it comes clear to me. It says the creation of a special purpose stabilization fund requires a 2/3 vote of a city or town council, town meeting, or district committee, and this vote must clearly define the purpose of the fund being established. As with the general stabilization fund, a city or town council, district committee, or town meeting may appropriate into a special fund, stabilization fund, by majority vote, and may appropriate out of one by 2/3 vote. And then it goes down a little further down. It says, like a general override, additional tax revenue can be raised year after year without a community-wide ballot question beyond the year of inception. So you vote on it once, and they can add funds to it, you know, under proposition Prop 2.5. And then you only vote to take the money out, you, the town, or to change the use of the purpose of the fund.
Okay.
So I think it's pretty clear on how it works.
okay, and it's appropriate.
Yeah. But the other thing on the spend side of the fund though, Mike, is these funds are created primarily to respond to, you know, resident concerns. The residents, our roads are in really bad shape, or this is that. So they don't want you to just put the money in there and not use it. They want the money to go in and get used, which is why I think the select board put in their document that they expect, you know, a plan, a 3 to 5 year plan, and they want to see action on that plan with the funds that go into this stabilization fund.
Fair enough.
You want to work on the policy now, Mike? Or is that? I know you're not fully comfortable. That's obviously not a problem at all. But are you comfortable going to the policy now, or do you want to still unpack some?
No, I think we've gone as far as we can.
Yeah.
So let's move on.
Perfect. Let's move to the policy. Okay. Okay, just anyone have any issues with these first 3 paragraphs?
This is a really thing good to keep in mind, which is, you know, the select board, you know, or town meeting can appropriate funding to these, you know, if there's free cash. I mean, these funds aren't exclusive to just the override funding, so they can do other, there's some flexibility there, which is interesting. Let me just make it a little wider that we can see comments.
Sorry, I'm just reconciling this against a prior version that I had marked, and that's why I'm a little sluggish here, among other reasons. But
That's correct.
yeah, I'm just looking at the language, the school fund. A second. School fund.
Thoughts in here. Thanks.
So I'm just trying to make sure that the language we use here ties to the ballot question, so that the thing that's referred to is quite clearly a special purpose stabilization fund. I think on the ballot it said the school capital fund.
1 sec. School capital stabilization fund. Yep.
Well, that's what we should call it here then. So in the parentheses where it becomes a defined term, earlier on that line, the school capital stabilization fund, in the parens, no, in the parens,
Purpose,
where we're creating a defined term, right?
yeah.
No, so but we're just going to call it school fund from here, so we should change this part, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be school capital
Should be-
stabilization fund, not school capital.
Says, will be known as the School Capital Stabilization Fund. That's what it says in the warrant.
Correct. Yeah, so it should be like
So
that.
that should be the defined term, should be school capital stabilization fund, because that's
Yeah,
what.
AKA the school fund. So
Yeah,
there's
you can call it whatever you want from that point on, as long as you refer to it properly.
exactly.
Before the parens.
Okay,
Yeah, school fund. Let's do Control F here. School fund. School just, you know, when a word no longer makes sense to you, school just completely blew my mind there for a second. So weird.
yeah, I mean, I know I'm being a nitwit, but it bothers me that we don't have the word capital in each of these places.
We have it right here, Brian.
Yeah,
Oh, you want to say School Capital Fund?
school capital fund, whatever. I mean, I hear your point, Corey. We're calling it the school fund, but it just,
Yeah,
you
whatever.
don't read the first line, like imaginations start to wander. Does anyone have any aversion to just inserting the word school? Or sorry,
No, but I'm having the same problem Corey's having now.
Right?
School suddenly looks really funny.
It looks like a nonsense word now. Anyway, yeah. That is how you spell school, right? Like,
it
That's
is.
correct.
I'm losing my mind here.
There was a time when the word Google looked stupid too, but
Oh, that comes with territory. Brian, I disagree. Once
okay,
you define it, I mean, if someone is smart enough to want to, not smart enough, paying attention enough to dive into the language of the school fund, they'll be able to dive in and see that it's defined above. So
okay,
I don't share that concern at all, and I'd rather keep it short than add words.
fair enough. I don't hear anyone else expressing a view on this, so, and you seem to have a strong one, so we'll go with it.
Doesn't mean I believe it. I just, I take positions.
Okay. Can you go just back up a little
Back
bit,
for a
Corey?
second, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I wonder, yeah, that's what I need to read right there.
What does that mean, external site purchases?
I think anything that's outside of the building envelope is my understanding. So, not just within the building, but if there's something that's a school facility on the property.
Okay,
What that raises in my mind, and this whole thing, is the qualitative nature, with some reservation here, of this whole thing. It is not something you can rigidly define. And fundamentally, anything like this allows for enormous interpretation by future capital budget committee meetings,
Correct.
capital budget members, school committee people who have insist it means this, or select board members who think it means that. This is sloppy, absolutely sloppy. And unless you actually lay out every detail, it will be a subject to interpretation. This is poor legislative process here, the worst possible. There's
So
double
Rob,
this kind of thing, right?
so Rob, your point's taken. The bottom line, however, is that we actually need a policy. So we need to fix it and make it the best that we possibly can.
Well, the simplest way to fix this is to put a dollar number above which the money will be drawn out of this fund, and below which it will come out of the capital stabilization fund. It's so obvious, because the purpose initially was to cover the future need of actually doing a major renovation to a school or a new school. But the way this reads, you could spend it right out and have absolutely nothing other than another major override whenever the middle school process completes its studies.
That's a helpful comment, because I just want to clarify my understanding of the purpose of this is completely different. This is not about just major projects. This is about jumpstarting all of the capital items that need to get done, across the facility, all the facilities, inside the building, outside the building, anywhere, on the property, provided it's fundamentally an attachment or an improvement.
Well, the basic question is, what didn't we do in the past 3 or 4, 6, 7, 8 years that didn't get done? What didn't get done?
So, well, a ton of stuff, but
Well, be specific.
Okay, I will circle back to that in exactly 1 second. Well, exactly after one comment, which is part of the purpose of setting up this fund and setting the funding level at the level that it is, was to pull the capital spend on the schools in terms of the buildings out of the historical capital budget funding mechanism. Same process, but out of that mechanism and into this one, so that it's not in competition with other departments for those dollars. It's
the interpretation
all
then,
in here.
Okay, so the interpretation then is where there are certain things that come out of the capital stabilization fund and get put into this fund.
Correct.
That leaves, of course, and I've looked at some numbers here, that leaves a heck of a lot of money in the capital stabilization fund that really actually then can get spent. And between that and the schools, you're talking $1 million. So at least, this is a double hit in every possible way. One is another $1 million is available now through the capital stabilization fund for things they don't have to pay for. And then another $1.5 million being spent for things which may or may not be as important as for example, a need for a new roof when you're going to end up actually bonding it anyway, or a new HVAC system and bond that too. In other words, I see this as an enormous spend on both sides, and very qualitative judgments being made as to what should be done. So this is really dangerous stuff we're talking about now.
Okay, so circling back to your question of what hasn't gotten done,
yeah.
We have, for the most part, not all, but for the most part, funded the facility related capital requests that have come to us. Okay, there are many that we have not. For example, we had requests for replacing classroom tiles at Deer Hill last year, which I think it was $100,000 request per year spread over 6 years, and we said no, that makes no sense to do. To do death by 1,000 cuts. We're not going to do a few rooms a year. Let's just do it once and do it when we actually have the money to spend. So that got pushed. There have been requests for replacing ceiling tiles. There are capital requests. There have been requests to replace the sidewalk at the middle high school, up along up basically from halfway up the hill from Pond Street all the way up to the auditorium, right? So there legitimately are hundreds of thousands of dollars of requests that we have seen and have not had capacity to spend, out of the regular way capital funding mechanism. And part of this is to be able to fund those things.
But I'm just looking at the numbers. Okay, I'm saying we spent for the schools $484,000 in 2022, right? Of that, actually, we did retile all the classrooms for $100,000.
We did not retire all the classrooms. We retired like 4 of them.
I'm reading right off the.
I know what you're reading. I'm telling you, the money covered 4 classrooms.
Right. So we did it.
No, we thought we did it. The money covered like 4 classrooms.
Nevertheless, you can't say that it wasn't an adequate spend, because you can continue to do this in future years.
No, but Ralph, last year they came back and asked for another 100,000, which we didn't do, and we told them, because we said we already did this. Why are you coming back to us? And it turns out that it was the first installment of a half dozen, and we did not have the money last year to do the whole Big Bang project.
But I mean,
I'm sorry to say it, but I do think that what is wrong with all of this is that we're taking this and making a huge available hunk of money, $1.5 million plus whatever we don't have to now take out of the capital stabilization fund. So you're talking about a $2 million spend here. It would be hard to spend $2 million productively unless you're putting money aside to actually do something to avoid the need to build a new school or to renovate the middle high school.
This
So
does that as well, Ralph. It does both.
not without a money amount set into it, so that in fact the small items still come out of the capital stabilization, but the big ones that would normally be bonded or be a new school or a renovation of a major school come out of that fund. In other words, the fund is now just simply one more place where we can spend money, as I say.
Well, that's part of why I want all of it to be in one place. I don't want there to be one more place. I want there to be one place.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. Yep.
And,
I think
and
it should still be
this
the whole
can't even
process.
exist if you can go to the capital budget. And I definitely don't want people going back and forth between the two.
Right. So what it really argues, and I'm arguing for, is the capital budget or stabilization fund has been inadequate for a number of years. So what we've decided is we're going to actually constrain what it can actually vote for, because we're setting aside school and roads, when in fact all you needed to do was to adequately fund the capital stabilization fund in the first place.
Right, so, which we've asked for hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. Well,
it would be if people accept an override.
If you do a regular override, there's no guarantee that the money goes to capital or to schools or to roads.
Correct.
And that's the difference between this and a general override. A general override, people can stand up and blither all they want about what they're going to do with the money.
That's going to go right to capital.
Guys, you're talking about an undisciplined management. Basically,
yes, we are.
Well, that's what you're really saying. The management is undisciplined and has been undisciplined for many, many years. And as a result of being undisciplined, basically, capital stabilization has been inadequately funded. That's what you're saying. And if we do fund it by general override, the undisciplined nature of this thing will continue. That is really a terribly difficult thing to actually accept.
But this is there's certain realities here, right? Which is it's 110,000 square foot building, which was built in 19 what? I mean, even if the capital stabilization fund was properly funded from day one in 2009, we still wouldn't have enough money to maintain that building. This is coming, this building is it's a huge square foot building that's going to require X amount of dollars to maintain every year, regardless of how we budget for it. It's just the reality. And the list of stuff that hasn't been done is huge, whether or not we, need to do it now, whatever. But I don't think there's any version of this where the town budget would ever, unless we started funding this day one after we built the school, I don't think there's any way the math would work where you could properly maintain 110,000 square foot building within existing fiscal policy. It's just, this is a 1,000-pound gorilla. It's enormous. It's the biggest thing we have in town by a factor of 5, whatever, 10. And it's always going to eat up a huge amount of money. Then there's no way we can get out of that unless we bulldoze the thing. It's just the reality of having this building.
That doesn't give me comfort about how money gets spent, I can tell you. So there's no discipline I can tell you there's no discipline here at all. The zero. You're creating a $2 million capability of spending, and you'd have difficulty spending that every year, unless you just simply are wanton in doing it. So, and if you're not reserving it as the original idea was here, and I'm sorry to say this is direct from the select board, not when you were not there, is that the purpose is to preclude the need to immediately go and build a new school, is to preclude it.
That's true.
That is what it's about. But at the same breath, we're going to spend $400,000 to actually do something that AI3 has already done, but to actually induce the possibility of building a new school, irrespective of what you do here. That's the problem.
So that's a separate matter, but
it's all connected now, right?
And all your concerns are valid, Rob. They're all entirely valid from the fiscal discipline all the way through to this to the feasibility study.
And so we're going to correct it by taxing the people. That's what we're going to do. And that doesn't correct it. It just simply says we're going to get more money. That's all.
Look,
I mean, so Ralph, I totally agree with what you said. I mean, back months ago when we were talking about this the first time, when we talked about the $1.5 million stabilization fund, and then right after that was a request for $1.5 million to figure out how to spend the money. I went, hold on a second, right? you got me on one, but if you want me on two, you can't have, there's a discussion here. And I think your point is, and my point was, if you're not clear on how to spend the money, then, we shouldn't be doing this. And I think that's, to your point exactly, Ralph. What I hear from Nick from a few weeks ago, and what I hear now from the school committee, and again, I think we all have our concerns about the feasibility study, but there is a lot of work we have to do to the school right now anyway, and it does feel like a larger renovation is kind of where things are leaning, because of the amount of square footage we have, because of the amount of students we have. But I also think that this money, either, as I said earlier, is going to be something that either needs to end if we do a big exclusion, or we may find that once we take care of a lot of the big things, people may look up and go, hey, it's a great school. I mean, people's minds change very quickly. And if, the biggest issues they have in that video were, cracked walls and cracked this, well, let's fix those. And then maybe the whole temperature comes down quite a bit because we're properly repairing our infrastructure. So, your concerns, Ralph, I see them completely, and I share them as well. I look at this as hopefully a productive way to see ourselves through those things in a way that allows us to maintain our facilities, serve our children, and also make better decisions going forward.
Well, thanks, Corey. And so I appreciate where you're coming from. I just, I've been through this. I went through it when the schools were actually, because I was a select board when the schools were built, or when they were renovated. I've been through this whole thing many times before. And it is discipline is the problem, and the inability of the town to actually adequately fund in a disciplined way the renovations or the repair of the buildings. It really is it. And the high school was done only, 13, 14, 15 years ago. It's not that old. It's quite new.
It opened the doors in 03.
In 03, so it's 20 years exactly.
20 years exactly.
20 years exactly. So that is not a very old building, as it turns out. And if you had Rob Spofford here, he'd be protesting that, what are you saying about this building? But anyway, and then when you come down to it, the AI3 people really were arguing not so much about the poor quality of the building. They were talking about different methods of teaching as much as anything else.
Correct. That was
so that's
somewhat comical coming from an architect.
Yeah.
But that's going to drive it no matter what. That will be the argument. You know that.
Yeah.
But anyway,
we'll get through that when it comes. Yeah.
So there are some comments here by Ellen Marr.
Okay.
I don't know if you want me to read them. If you want.
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
Sure.
So Cohasset Middle High School is 220,000 square feet. Joseph Osgood is 70,000 square feet. And the Deer Hill School is 83,400 square feet. 77% of total square footage of town buildings, over 40 acres of grounds. And she goes on to say, since town meeting 2018, $3.9 million allocated to schools, 33% of total capital budget allocations, $662,000 to bus leases, $496,000 to technology, and $2.6 million to legit maintenance, $70,000 to others. An example of furniture.
That's helpful, Ellen.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
So look, getting back to a handful of your concerns, Ralph. I just want to hit.
That's remarkable.
Hit on two. The first is, how this money gets spent, this 1.5 million per year. And I'm just literally rattling off the top of my head what Nick presented to us. But, even without his list in front of me, I know sitting here right now today, we need to spend 500 grand on the alarm system up at the middle high school right away, because it's a safety issue, whether we're tearing the building down in 3 years or not. It just doesn't even matter. You can't not fix the alarm system while you figure it out.
Yep.
I know as we sit here today, we're underfunded with regards to the air handlers that were funded by this committee and by town meeting years and years ago and never got executed on. And, now we've got, COVID greedflation has escalated those prices pretty dramatically. We know we've got, Osgood School first up with regards to a roof replacement, which is, I don't remember what the number was, but I think it was somewhere around $1.5 million or $2 million. And at the time that we do that roof replacement, we need to replace the vertical windows, the vertical skylights up there on the footwalls. And we're also due at the same time to basically replace all of the mini split units on that roof. So we've got a couple $1 million with a very short date coming at us, with the Osgood School and just that group of projects that I just mentioned to you. Okay. I mean, that should eat up a year or two of this funding just between those. We've deferred for at least 5 years now the sidewalk up at the high school, and then we have the other roofs coming at us. Next is Deer Hill, which has a little bit more life in it than Osgood, which is Osgood's a current problem. Deer Hill's kind of the next most urgent. And the middle high school is probably the one that Nick thinks he can stretch the longest, which is he's thinking it about 7. He's probably got about 7 years in it before it really starts to become a chase the leak patching issue with major sections up there. So we're for the foreseeable future, the major items in those buildings plus the small, well, I want to say small, plus the stream of things we would have historically seen at Capitol, right? Redoing floor tiles, things like that, are going to absolutely chew through, this appropriation, and absolutely will not fit inside the historical capital budget mechanism. That's
unless it were funded.
I mean, where it goes after that, I don't know. But as far as I can look out, credibly, looking at what's coming at us, there's going to be demand for this and more. And it's yes, Ellen, I see your hand up. We'll come to you in a second. But what's unique is that even though we've spent $2.6 million in maintenance across these buildings, we've had buildings that people have, I think, still in their mind view as very fresh. The fact is they're all 20 plus years since their last major renovation and or replacement, right? The middle high school was
what was the
recent.
lifespan projected when they were built? It was far longer than 20 years.
Yeah, look, I'm not talking about tearing them down. I'm talking about major systems. Like,
no, a roof should last far longer than 20 years.
I think if Nick were on the phone, he'd tell you that between 25 and 30, you're
okay. Well,
you're
25 or 30, I'll take that.
Yeah, we're coming up. We're there. We're there on Deer Hill School. We're there on Osgood, and we're 7 years away on the middle high school, Michael.
I don't think we are on Deer Hill, but I don't want to quibble here. I know that Ellen had her hand raised,
Yeah.
And then I have one other important observation that I'd like to.
So bottom line, look, these buildings are. I completely see your point, Michael. These buildings are not dead and they're not garbage. Okay, they're approaching their next major capital replacement cycle for their major systems: roofs, doors, windows, HVAC systems, alarms, and it's going to chew through this money with nothing to spare. And
but also, if they're still, the buildings are still good, let's keep them upright, right? I mean, I think
correct. It's better to fix them than to replace them.
Right,
So,
and I just did some math. I mean, based on 373,000 square foot, the amount of money we spent $10 per square foot in the last 6 years to maintain that. Like, that's just not enough money for maintaining a building when it comes to if you're just replacing floor tiles or doing anything else.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, so if we don't want to tear these buildings down, the alternative is to fix them to the point.
Be ready to replace the roofs and windows.
Exactly, because if you don't replace the roofs and windows, and all of a sudden we've got a mold issue, that decision's made for us, right? I mean, this is, for me, I look at everything in the form of risk. What is the risk to the town if we let buildings go into disrepair? And that's a risk we can't control anymore, right? The costs, once they're out of our hands, things explode, and there's nothing we can do. Right now, we're at a point where we can do some stuff. And maybe then we look differently upon these buildings in 5 or 6 years after we've deployed and we've made some good fixes. And then we are talking about the next 30 years, 40 years of these buildings.
So I just put up on the screen what's on the town website with respect to the school fund and what it'll be used for. And it's a lot of what Brian was just going through. But it goes back to the document that we're just looking at for me, because they changed the language in the document. I think they wanted to keep it a little more open.
Yep.
But I like the word critical infrastructure needs, because later in the document, they talk about, you know, revisiting whether you continue to put money in the fund if these circumstances change, but they didn't say what the circumstances were. So I think if we put back in critical infrastructure needs in that document, we kind of close this loop that we're focusing on large items.
Well, let me ask you, okay, so what the issue is, I mean, are ceiling tiles and floor tiles like critical infrastructure needs?
Right.
Like, I don't want to like play the game of, you know, I'll just be really blunt, okay? I don't want to play the game of the school coming and pushing, and every department does this, by the way, okay? Most departments try to push things from their operating budgets into capital budgets, right? They'll bundle up 10 of these and all of a sudden it's a capital item and bring it to capital and I have to put it in my operating budget. But we don't want to create a structure where there's an incentive for any party to push items from one funding source over to another to preserve their own capacity. So
Well, they do have flooring is listed on here as a critical infrastructure, and the alarm system is on here as well. And
But I think that's
sidewalks.
okay, right? I mean, part of, Ralph mentioned the minimum maximum. I don't want like this fund to not go to small repairs that only cost a couple hundred bucks.
Correct. So
I want the fund to be able to address the things that need to be addressed.
And
Regardless
that's
of how much.
my feeling as well. My feeling is, and look, people can disagree and we can talk about how to best do this, but I don't want to spend time every year debating, is it this fund or that fund? Like, where does it get funded? Like, from my perspective.
No, I hear you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that this is what's been put out in front of the town people as
Right.
the purpose of the fund, and the document does have that one sentence that it seems as if it's referring back to something said earlier, but nothing was said earlier. So
Right.
So, well, Susan,
This is
I mean,
what
to
we're-
that point, why don't we just copy that language and just say, we would like in the stabilization fund policy to have the language, which is in part of the brief. I think that's a fairly
Which
one-to-one.
language are we talking about?
She's talking about,
I don't have the document in front of me right now, so it was
No,
on
no.
the screen a little while ago.
well, I've got the stabilization fund, but Susan, you're saying that because it says here, the stabilization fund will support the necessary maintenance, replacement, and improvement to critical infrastructure across the 4 schools and the spaces around them. My recommendation is we just grab that sentence and we shove it into the policy. Because that's what people are reading, right? If that's what the brief says, that's what the policy should say, which includes.
Well, okay, so let me ask. I mean, then it becomes a debate as to what's critical infrastructure, and if it's not critical, and well, someone will say, well, we need this, but it's not critical infrastructure, therefore it goes over the capital stabilization fund, or has to come out of free cash or something else, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I don't disagree.
My instinct is, if it's capital and it's something that, you know, a landlord would take care of in the context of a landlord-tenant relationship, and it's within the, you know, the perimeter of these school properties, then it's out of this fund. I mean, in simplest context, I don't know how to turn that into words, but
Well, you flip it
so
upside down.
we would continue to fund buses, we would continue to fund laptops, we'd continue to fund, you know, town-wide IT, we would continue to fund laptops, sorry if I said that, you know, desks and chairs, you know, interactive whiteboards that go up on the wall, right? All those things would continue to come out of capital. But if you're talking about the property, the buildings, you know, the improvements, that's what this fund is for.
And also it benefits the capital fund to not have critical in there because you don't want things falling out of it. I mean, I think, Brian, that's your point, which is kind of, I think, reverse of what the other concerns are, which is you want things to go into this fund, not to fall out of the fund. Does that?
I want to create governance that's simple when people have a request. It should be obvious where that request should be taken.
Yeah.
So that, you know, so that our successors and the school's successors and the select board successors don't, you know, have to engage in a debate as to what the funding mechanism is for a given request. And I'm just a little concerned that when you say critical infrastructure, it creates an interpretation.
Well, I just brought it up because that's what it says here, but what,
Yeah.
what you're basically saying is what I would know as building envelope, for example. You know,
It's
if you're a
envelope and it's-
tenant, if you're a tenant, then they take
Yeah.
their common spaces in the building envelope. Obviously, they're not tenants, so we have to maintain some stuff on the inside of the school.
Yeah. I'm really thinking property envelope. I mean,
Susan, I booted your share to put this back up. My
That's fine.
apologies if that wasn't okay. Since you had mentioned it, I felt like people were talking about this now, so.
Yeah, so if you can just go to the third bullet point under the special purpose fund. It's the select board may, whoop, you were just there, you moved it.
All right, so, oh wait, I'm
Maybe
sorry to
tur-
drive me. Where am I going?
Yeah, stay still. The select board may determine to reduce the fund in the event a substantial change in circumstances supports a decrease to the funding level. So all I'm saying is we never really define what the circumstances were that, you know, how do you measure a substantial change in something that you haven't addressed?
I think that's something which we should be, and we will be debating in the future. Again, substantial changes. Do we have a school project? Did MSBA let us into their accelerating repair program, which is back open, right? I mean, those sort of things. I think that would trigger that phrase.
or do we get through, you know, new roofs and windows and whatever else needs replaced, and we're into our next sort of, you know, 20-year quiet period, which is kind of what we've enjoyed, honestly, for, you know, for certainly, you know, up through 2015. Now, we have started to spend school capitals from, you know, in the past few years at a much higher clip than we did, you know, 5 to 7 years ago.
Yep.
And I go back to 2015, that like there was nothing, and it's because the buildings were still pretty young relative to the last major investment cycle. So I mean that could be a substantial change too. Like we're just caught up, and now we've got another, you know, whatever 15-20 year runway.
Well, it was originally defined to be the items that are on this, what do they call this thing? The project brief.
Yeah.
And then it was made more general. So that's why that circumstances thing sticks out to me, because it seems like, what are we talking about? What circumstance did we have that has now substantially changed? But that's just my comment, you know.
So you think we should cut it, Susan, or?
No, I'm saying the first bullet should define what the circumstances that we're currently in are.
I don't know how we do that.
Well, the way
Like
they do it in the
I'm not
brief
being-
is they say, support the necessary maintenance, replacement, and improvements to critical infrastructure across the 4 schools and the spaces around them.
I know, I don't know, but my understanding is that there was some debate that took place around improvements. Because some people immediately seized on that and said, oh, well, this, you know, this is, you know, this fund is actually going to fund a major renovation and or, you know, replacement. So I think that's part of the reason the language has been made.
I mean, when it comes to the big ticket concerns, that's my big ticket. This kind of stuff I'm not as concerned about, but I am concerned about whether this fund gets taken over to do, you know, I don't want to call it, you know, just appearance things, but you know, I'm more concerned this fund isn't misused to do things that aren't infrastructure, that aren't repairs, but that are, you know, improvements of someone's particular agenda.
Okay.
And the language as is here, I think, is pretty protective of that. So the other things, you know, that's the thing that would keep me up at night with this fund.
So that's a reference to the critical infrastructure, Corey?
No, just the fact that before we took out the language about whether it is to take it out for a feasibility study, or the fact that it's not really saying that it's going to be used for changes I mean, this, the way this is written to me is pretty clear that it's for repairs of the existing facility, not huge changes in how the school runs and operates and all those things. That would be then, to me, the substantial change in circumstances, which I alluded to earlier, which is if there's a conclusion from the school facilities committee that we need to tear a bunch down, that's a substantial change. Then this fund needs to be looked at again to say, okay, if we're doing all this work, do we still need this fund? And I think the discussion at that point will be, no, we don't need this fund if we're going to be doing a giant project with the MSBA. So, I just don't want this fund to turn into, those things happening without the discussion about, where we're going. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I also don't think this to me seems silly. Isn't a hearing a legally defined term should present? I mean, and should it be
tell you what, we're jumping around a bit. Can I just make a suggestion? We just chip down through each one of these paragraphs one at a time.
Apologies. Yeah.
So financial goal. Is everyone comfortable with that paragraph? Is everyone comfortable with the paragraph financial goal?
I'm not a fan of the stabilization fund in general. So
I understand, but we're just trying to describe what it is, recognizing that it's going to get voted on.
Well, I think the problem with that first line, okay, the purpose of the special purpose stabilization fund is to provide funding for future capital needs without forcing cuts to other capital or operational needs during the year. So it's going to be hard to really, because that is so broad as a statement, it just strikes me that it's maybe by definition below it works, but if you leave it alone, then it doesn't. It's just very, very wishy-washy as to what they really mean. So what you mean. So I'm going to say, fine, leave that paragraph the way as it is,
Okay.
and then make the definitions below much more specific.
Okay. So let's move on to the first paragraph of school spec. Anyone else on financial goal?
Well, I just think that during that year doesn't make any sense because they don't mention anything about the year. Because you're creating this fund, it's not a single year fund. Once you create it, it's going on for multiple years. So why are we saying capital needs during that year? What year?
Probably right. Should say in the future.
Just ended after operational needs, period.
Yeah, right.
Period.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Who's flying the plane here? Is someone actually controlling the document?
I think it's Corey.
Corey was, but
Okay, we may have lost him. Yeah, he's okay. So we'll
Okay.
just, I guess we'll make a note of that, and when he comes back, we'll. Okay, when he comes back, we'll get that. I just made a note. Okay, let's move on to the next paragraph. School Special Purpose Stabilization Fund. Target funding floor for a school capital stabilization fund shall be 1.5. Okay, it's a little wonky that is to address facility and external purchase and external site purchases, projects and repairs.
This should be initial funding. We
Okay.
shouldn't set the
Hey,
floor.
Corey, you were gone for a moment. We, now that you're back, just up a paragraph up above financial goal.
Yep.
It was suggested that we put a period after operational needs and delete during that year.
Sure.
Considering this.
And then I would say, I wouldn't add floor here because I think it would takes away the ability for the select board to lower it.
The thing about the word floor does tie to the word 2024 here, so apparently it's probably they'll never the first year they're not going to lower it clearly. So, but anyway.
Correct. Yeah, it probably doesn't matter to your point, Ralph. Okay.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the language isn't great, but
I did like the idea of this critical capital, whatever.
before we switch, do you guys just want to take out the word floor to say the target funding for school capital statement shall be 1.5?
That's kind of was my thought.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Because nothing's happening, Ralph, you're right. Nothing's changed. Nothing different is happening in fiscal 24.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. Sorry, Ralph, I interjected.
Well,
You were
it's
about to say
only,
something
you know,
about critical needs.
Yeah, that was the critical needs thing. It seemed to be an appropriate thing to say here, but I'm not sure. Maybe that's undefined as well, but it's better than this one, this language. Or maybe,
Why don't we just say critical capital needs
or whatever? Pick some words here. So
critical capital needs.
yeah,
Just chunk everything else.
Including facility. Critical capital needs of the school facilities and grounds. How about that? Or buildings and grounds?
I mean, facilities includes buildings, so does it not?
Yeah, I would think so. I think hold on a second. So what they were trying to do, hold on. What they were trying to do is clarify that this was for, and Corey, you caught on this, was that they were trying to clarify this is for maintenance and repairs and not new stuff.
Correct. That's
And when you hit that delete, it just jumped out at me.
yeah. The way it was written was a little tighter than this, which is broader. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but we're trading critical capital for repairs, basically. Because a critical capital need may not necessarily be a repair. It may be a purchase,
Well, again, I think that's why they use the language. Maintenance, replacement, and improvements to capital infrastructure. I think that's why they use it that way, because it covers the gamut.
Where are you seeing that language?
Is that in the handout, the brief?
It's on the website. That's in their brief on the website.
I mean, I don't think we're splitting the atom here. I don't think we're creating nuclear fusion by fixing these words. Maybe it's not worth our time.
Yeah, the only thing that's bothering me is the word site purchases side by side.
Well, you can just switch it around, Brian, and say to fund purchases, projects, and repairs for school school facilities and grounds or something like that.
And repairs. Okay, I mean, I guess I'm comfortable with that. Anyone else have a view before we move on?
Fine.
I mean, I'm wrestling with it, but I don't have a magic rabbit to pull out of the hat in terms of verbiage, the purpose.
Yeah, you know, these are the kinds of things you have to sit back and really think about. This is,
Yeah.
And because what the basic issue here is to make sure that, as you say, we don't have a lot of things slipping in and out of these funds and not be understanding what belongs in what one. And the tightness of the language is critical to making that distinction for future boards and committees, right?
Yeah. Yes, and that's what we're trying to achieve here.
I know it's hard to do it online this way, I must say.
It is. It's also very hard to do it in collaboration without breaking open meeting law. So, you know, here we are trying to pack the sausage casing, right? I mean, can I just make a suggestion that before the word purchases, we insert capital? I think that does it. The purpose of the school fund is to address capital purchases, projects, and repairs.
That's important, right? I agree with that.
Yeah.
Right.
And again,
I think that does it for me.
It also, again, every time a project is being spent on, it's going to go through all the normal processes, including this committee and advisory and select board and town meeting, right? So this is not language that's enforced. This is language for guidance. So
I agree. Right.
Yeah, future committees can look at this, go, hey, this doesn't really fit, and then they can go through that filtration and maybe find a different bucket.
How about this? Repairs, you say at these school facilities and sites, change the word "the" to existing.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Brian, Ellen Marr also has a couple of comments.
Yes, Ellen, please save us.
So I'm going to read her comments, and then I believe she's here to speak. She's available. She just says it's important to have maintenance and repairs so that funds are not used for remodeling or other agenda-driven issues.
Exactly. Yep.
It's important for maintenance and repairs are included so that other things such as remodel don't creep in.
Okay, so how do we do that with this language? And if someone wants to promote her, please go ahead. But anyone that has some good language here. Capital purchases, maintenance, and repairs at existing school facilities and sites.
So, I mean, it also gives me great, I mean, it matters a lot to me that the select board member is reflecting at every point in this discussion the same concerns we have, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we can work to clean up the language here, but I think that we've got support from, there's the same thoughts are happening in different places, so the final language hopefully will continue to get tighter.
They are. So I don't know, Michelle, can you promote Ellen? Would she like to address us, or?
She's able to speak if she'd like to.
Okay, great.
I believe she is. Ellen, are you able to?
I see the box, but
Yeah. It looks like she's unmuted, but she may be having difficulty connecting.
technical
with her
difficulty.
audio.
Okay, well, look, we're going to be here for a while, so let's just keep working if Ellen can join us. And she certainly understands our issues, and select board is picking this up on Thursday, as I understand it. So let's just do the best we can. Okay, so let's read this one last time and then try and move on. The purpose of the school fund is to address capital.
I personally like that much better because it's getting somewhat to the point of, creating a circumstance that we're trying to fix.
Yeah. All right. I think it kind of works. Everyone else good? Should we move on? Next paragraph?
Yep.
All right.
I got no problem with that.
You know, it's interesting in the previous one, and the language of this second one, which is rather interesting. Through the Capital Stabilization Fund, free cash or other sources. And I think, let's see, where does it say? I think it says, I thought I read it somewhere here. We're talking about through borrowing or whatever else. In other words, that is what you want to allow for is that the stabilization fund allow for funds to be borrowed. In other words, to do some of this, you're going to have to borrow some.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know where that should pop in, but it does pop in other places. So,
Well, there's nothing in this policy that, or the existence of this fund that precludes,
Correct.
you
I
know,
understand.
capital budget from stepping in. It's what we're really trying to do is make sure that the money in this fund goes to its intended purpose.
Okay.
So I have an issue with the last sentence, but if anyone else has anything prior to that.
No, yeah, final sentence, I agree. Go ahead.
The existence of this school fund shall not preclude requests for other school items. Look, I think the intent is like other items can go to other places.
Yep.
But the way this is written, it suggests that this fund could actually hear requests for other school items, and that's a problem.
Correct.
So we need to clarify it.
I mean, it's already defined. I don't know even if you take this out, it doesn't change anything. I mean, it's just fine, right? I mean, it's trying to reinforce the point, but I think all it does is make it more confusing.
Yeah, I guess, given the existence of the prior sentence, I think this is already covered.
Yes, that's kind of my
Yeah.
thought too.
Do you think that was possibly in there for PSO and CEF as a source of funding things? I don't think it needs to be in there, but I'm just trying to figure out why it's in there.
It just says, I mean, the prior sentence says other sources. I mean, I don't know why it's in there, but the way it's written, it leaves open an interpretation.
Yeah.
Where one could say, okay, I can bring anything I want to this fund.
Yeah.
Good.
You could throw buses. I mean, if to the extent there's any concern around it, the other school capital in that bullet, the other school capital expenses. I mean, it just kind of, so just buses, computers.
Well, you may, if you put buses in, you also probably mean vehicles of all kinds, but anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but it's a such, right? I mean, we're not trying to be completely exhaustive. I just don't want anyone to come back and say, oh, you know, where the bus is going to go. And that's the big one.
I understand, yeah, but that's the looseness that's the difficulty with these kinds of things where it's
Yeah,
you're trying to be so specific, but you can't be specific enough ever, so.
it's true. All right. So if we're good with that, maybe we move to the next.
Yeah.
My comments here is that the fund, nowhere in this does it say that the fund can also be funded using other sources. I mean, the select board, you know, or town meeting we could put capital, we can put fund money into this fund if we want to. That should just be stated.
the other is a pretty declarative statement. It says it is intended that the select board will continue to fund the school road fund at 1.5 million level. In other words, it's a very declarative statement, whereas in fact, what we really mean is they have flexibility to do that or not.
Yeah.
They do have flexibility. Maybe we should say that, but I do also want to be clear with our disclosure and expectation that, you know, they will raise it 2.5% a year. I mean, I think that's sort of the default, because if you don't raise it, obviously the purchasing power declines over time.
Yeah.
Which is how we got into this pickle in the first place, by the way.
I think I like the new language better, right?
Well, we lost the 1.5, the initial 1.5 million. I guess it's already up above.
It is, yeah.
Right.
So I mean, this language here summarizes this language, which is very nice and clean.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I'd say the fund may also, the school fund. How do I phrase this?
From other sources, I would guess.
So the only thing that we don't have in there is that it can go down. But
Yeah, it does.
it's like we're rewriting the entire text of the Massachusetts general,
Well, we're giving guidance to people that come next, right?
yeah.
So
that's
it
not
does
in
say,
there.
yeah.
So as a policy, I mean, should we imply that they intend to raise it by 2.5? Because to your point, Susan, I mean, just reiterating the law doesn't really create policy. I mean, it perhaps simplifies things for our successors, but
I don't think we can say intends to, because you don't know what a board is going to. I mean, I think that was Ralph, if I heard you right. I mean, that declarative statement, the select board can't declare its intentions in the next years, because it's not going to exist in previous
That's correct. That's correct.
So I mean, intentions or whatever, I mean, are really, you know, there's no value there. But the select board has the authority to do that, which
That's right. That's
which
right.
makes it clear, if people have a question with whose authority this is under, it's under the select board's authority. Go talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing, and I know this is a difficult one for you guys, but I would have a termination clause here as well. That after so many years, this is automatically terminated unless voted, unless the I don't know, the authorizing the select board or town meeting votes to continue it. In other words, there's no termination at this point on this thing. So even if we don't have a need, it would be very difficult for any board without a termination clause here to actually not continue the fund. And I understand it could be, we renew all these buildings and everything is renewed with regard to its 20-year life. So all these things are now 20-year life buildings, and we don't need the fund at this level. Without a termination clause, it would be very difficult for any select board to actually reduce the fund without a termination clause. So there's no, I would urge a termination clause here.
I got two thoughts of that. Is one, I've got no way to even start even considering what that would be like for a period. But the second thing is that's probably not even legally enforceable, right? There's no discussion about creating a termination clause in the law.
That's right.
So even if it's
Not
in the
here.
policy,
I agree with you. I don't think the whole policy probably has much meaning in the law. You're right. I don't think so. Yeah, it would have to be in the warrant article and or the the voting article, whatever it is. I just don't see it as
Yeah.
being, probably can't be done here because this policy is just nice to know, but not binding.
And people can look, on the one hand, people can change the policy.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
Um,
policy can be changed easily, right?
Yes. On the other hand, and this is a testament to our I think to good faith. When people read policies in this town, they are I do see them deferential to those policies, and the fact that someone put real thought into writing them, ideally, and they do try to understand the intent when they were created, even with a full recognition that they probably have the ability to change them right then and there. So it is worth getting it right. I guess what I'm noodling with, and Corey, to Ralph, first of all, I agree with your point that it's logical that at some point, you should really give yourself a report card and ask the question, should this end or should it continue? Is it working?
Well, but we're kind of down here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't want to bring it up because
Maybe we'll get to it. Yeah, I was just thinking maybe at the end of it, you force sort of a review at the end of a 5-year period, to really force a little self-awareness as to whether or not this is working or should be terminated or restructured. I don't know.
I mean, I think the first year that there's something that comes into the town meeting where, the school is buying bouncy castles. I mean, people are gonna notice, right? So
Yeah.
I just, if you play this out, like town meeting gets real fun. And if there's something in here that's really people are gonna mention it and bring it up, and it's gonna go sideways. And town meeting can still say, no, we're not funding that. So, I do, I think there's a built-in hedge here, not hedge, but built-in rail for if this really is going on in a way that's ridiculous, people are going to notice.
Well, they're going to notice because you still have to ask for the spend appropriation before you can
Exactly.
spend.
Yeah, right.
Right. Just as capital works today. So,
Correct.
Okay. So it sounds like we'd like a termination clause, but this is an acknowledgement that doesn't really work and it's not legal. Is that kind of where we are?
Well, this is not a legal, well, it's not a legal document. You could put it in here, but it
Yeah.
has no legal force is the point.
Yeah.
You can put it in here. You could put in whether you want to review this in 5 years or whatever you want to say, but it is desirable to say there is at some point you have to take another look at this thing and force it. Now, is this not a binding document? So you could put it in here and it's not binding, and so you can live with it. Hopefully,
it certainly sets a moral obligation. If the thing gets terribly off the wire, somebody can say, look, we're supposed to review this. Let's review it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah. So you can put it in here. So.
Okay, let's chip through the rest of this, and at the end of the school state, this fund, we'll toy with the idea of creating a bullet, an additional bullet. So let's go on to the next bullet that's pre-existing. Is there a question or a comment? Yeah.
My initial reactions are kind of onerous, but I mean, based on the 5-year road plan and stuff like that. I mean, so if this is actually followed, I think we solve the when to sunset. If there really is a 3 to 5 year plan and it's good and it's in the town report, even, I mean, then great. I think we're that's where we want to be. I'm not sure if there's going to be enough time. Again, every time we make a report or we do this is it costs us money, right? So I just don't want there to be a case where if the 5-year plan isn't produced, that the school funds won't be appropriated because of that.
I'm just smiling. It's certainly the lack of a plan has never stopped us from making appropriations before.
This is fair.
Much as we'd like the plan and keep asking for it. But...
I mean, I think it's a good. I think if we tweak this bubble, we're just tweaking I think we can leave it.
from town and school staff. Okay. Yeah, because it's Nick and it's the schools. So yeah, it does have to be town and school staff. Okay, I think that bullet works. The only question is whether or not there should be a deadline for providing it. I mean, we said fall. That certainly means prior to December 31st. There's no question about that. And I guess fall actually has a technical end date.
So we did this on roads and sidewalks where we did the report ready annually on November 30th. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm
It's
less
the same.
fussed about the exact date. It needs to work for our management team, but it can't be so late that it's just messing everything else up. So you're saying presented prior to November 30th? Is that what you want to say? Same date?
Well, that's what we did last time.
On or around November 30th?
I'm kind of agnostic on it, but that's what the committee felt strongly about.
How do people feel about it? I mean, the idea is we want to, we want to get it done at a reasonable point in the year.
Last time we said November 30th, and that was signed off by Christine.
Chris, right.
Let's move it.
Let's just do it. Let's copy the language then.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, that these funds are supposed to create a discipline. We
Right.
ought to
Yeah.
we ought to
Let's-
have our ducks in a row all the time. The report should be updated constantly and ready at any point.
There's truth to that as well, Susan. I'd be happy with once a year, but there's truth to what you've said. Okay, so that's been dropped down to. Okay. Everyone okay with that bullet?
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the next. That works for me. Everyone else?
For me.
This is the legal language, yeah.
No, I'm reading about the joint meeting. I'm okay with that paragraph.
Yep.
Okay, and then the last paragraph, all transfers.
I think that word transfers is confusing. It sounds like you're transferring it to something else and not actually
Yeah.
just utilizing the funds.
How about all spending appropriations from the school fund? Is that? Uh,
What?
yeah. It's fine. We're just going to change it in a bunch of places. I guess it's really just this paragraph.
Really a better word. It's a word that, well, it's a word that people are more familiar with.
It is. I agree with you, Corey. And I agree with you, Susan. Transfers sounds more difficult to manage.
I'm curious about that paragraph in its entirety. Why would we ask the school committee not later than 90 days prior to the annual town meeting to deliver a request to the town manager and request that the select board place an article in the town warrant to use the funds? Why that whole process? I'm curious. What is the logic in that?
I could read between the lines a little bit, but I'd rather not do it out loud. But I agree in that it is both clunky and somewhat unnecessary. You know, we're already talking about meeting with the facilities and the school committee before, and the school facilities committee, and having a report. You know, we don't, you know, having this language like this kind of doesn't, just add some confusion.
I think so too. I don't see you need it, to be honest with you. Yeah.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second, not having been involved in sort of the flow ever, although Corey, you have as a select board member.
Yep.
I mean, when I read this, I interpret it to mean like, if you want something in the warrant, like tell us way in advance. It's probably not such an issue with regards to the well, I was going to say smaller items, but you know, sort of regular way capital requests, but it certainly becomes one with regards to bigger items.
So the fact that you've got this collaborative process between the select board, facilities, everybody else, capital, but then the final appropriation is determined by the school committee. So this gives the responsibility for creating the article to the school committee. Right? So, you know, okay. But you know, that's one way this could work. Another way that could work is just a town manager article, because it's not part of the school budget. You know, that's protected. You know, normally these articles would come out of the collaboration between the town manager, the school committee, facilities, you know, all those things. But this kind of reverses it and says the school committee shall deliver the report and request the select board place an article. So it makes the school committee the sponsor and the author in some ways of the school fund article, which is a little bit, you know. Typically, the school committee makes requests for capital, and the capital has its article, and so does all these things. So having the school committee be it's just a little, it's not traditional.
It's not traditional, and also is specific to the school fund. So now they're making the distinction between what belongs in the school fund and what belongs in the capital stabilization fund. It doesn't seem to me that that's their not. I think what they need to do, or have done in previous paragraphs, in what we've already said here, is that there'll be a meeting of all the groups, and they will ultimately come up with the specific capital appropriations required.
Right.
So you really don't need this at all, as I see it. But,
well, and I do think it creates a awkward, I don't want to say a turf war, but some people could read this to say that the select board or the town manager of the facilities department, who does maintain the schools, doesn't have the authority to create the request. So, you know, if the school committee, let's say, doesn't want to, you know, what do we do? If the school committee, you know, has, you know, if there's disagreement on stuff, this doesn't necessarily encourage a joint process as much. You could read it that way. I don't think that's the intent of it, but
yeah, it kind of discourages the joint process here, right?
So I mean
yeah, I'm just chewing on this. When I read it, and it just got deleted. When I read it, I don't read anything in here that says, you know, the select board and the town manager can't create the article. It just says it's just creating expectation on the schools to speak.
I mean, it
doesn't promise that what the school requests is going to end up in the warrant.
To me, it says the school committee, by saying shall, by giving it the authority, just like you read in other laws, by default, you assume that the authority lies in the school committee to deliver the report and request the town article be placed to, which if
Well,
you don't
it's
say that
request
unless you're
the select
taking it away
board
from-
place an article in the town warrant.
I'm sorry.
It says request that the select board place an article in the town warrant.
Correct. So if you're explicitly giving a committee authority to do something, or it's a shall, it's not can, it's a shall, it's direct.
It's imperative. It's an
Exactly.
absolute.
That means, so if the school committee doesn't do that,
Yeah.
or
It-
has a different version of it, then what?
Yeah.
The town manager or the select board doesn't have, it doesn't say the town manager can do this himself or herself, or the facilities can. It just,
I'm kind of coming out a little where Ralph is in that if the plan that's presented has been vetted by the town, the school and the school committee as being the items that they think are necessary to fund that year, why do we need anything more than that?
yep. That's where I landed as well.
Okay, and chapter 59, section 21 CG basically says you follow the town's bylaws, is that?
Yep. It's just
Okay.
saying that, yeah.
And how about a situation where the school, I mean, I don't know if this is what was what people were concerned about, but what if this was intended to just prevent a situation where the school drops in a request, last minute? Which has happened. I mean, we've had people consider warrant articles, or capital requests, after our entire capital review process was completed. They'll come to us in late March, right? Be like, hey, we want this on the warrant. It's like, yeah, okay, you're 6 months late, but
Well, number one, we've talked about how that's kind of a systematic thing, which we all want
Yeah.
to fix. But the second part is, well, let's say something happens, right? And we need to fix something. Does it because it's not 90 days, can we not do it? Right. I mean, so there's, there's a hazard there too. So you would expect it to go through all the normal processes, to Susan's point. And if it's done that, great. Then we're, but I don't think we should exclude the, oh my God, what do we do moments? Or
yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I don't read this to exclude anything. I also don't read this to, I think this creates an imperative on the school committee, but that's it. I don't think it grants them any exclusive authority, and I don't think it prevents anyone from doing anything else that they're authorized to do under chapter 59 or the bylaws. It's just my read, not a lawyer, but I don't see any of that here. I certainly see the shall, that's an imperative on the school committee, but I don't see any transfer of exclusive authority.
Base level, I mean, it maybe creates an expectation, but we've got that expectation above in a more easily understood format. So lacking, the fact that this doesn't
True too.
needlessly change anything.
It's also an earlier date, frankly.
Exactly, right.
The
Yeah, so
beginning of the
process-
year.
Correct. Yeah. So
All
this
right,
just,
I look, I'm okay with it. I guess I'm open to the fact that somebody may have drafted this with a very specific purpose, and if that's the case, I don't really have a huge problem with this, although it does complicate things.
put it back in. We don't have final say.
Yeah, no, well, look, that's
Wait,
exactly
did you take
right.
it out just now? Did it just disappear?
I did. Yeah, I took it out.
Oh, because
Yeah.
I was gonna say that
Good job,
whether
here.
if we left it in, the one thing I think that's odd about it is it says they'll deliver a report.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity to say something different that has already been agreed to in the plan that was put before us, so.
Yeah,
I was thinking
It's
that
more
too.
that they should just deliver the message that they would like it put on the warrant. Not like a report that's gonna change what everybody's been working on up to that point.
well, there's also a report 3 bullets up, right? Or 2 bullets up at the top of the page there. This report shall be presented on around November 30th. So 3 to 5 year plan, right?
Yeah, so
Exactly.
that's what I mean. I mean, what do we need another one for?
Correct.
Okay. Corey, can you scroll back up to just, yeah, hold on a second. Right there's fine. Okay. So in the very first bullet there, second sentence, the purpose of the school fund is to address capital purchases. I'd like to insert the word all before capital purchases. With the purpose being, like, this is the fund that all those requests come to. It's not just another place to go.
I don't know. I don't know if that accomplishes much. And I also, again, we talked about this before, you know, if something pops up and they're 10 grand short, you know, do we want to create a
Oh,
policy?
that's fair. Good point. You're right. We
Yeah.
need to be able to, we need to be able to top it off with the capital. Okay.
Yeah. This sets an
Okay.
expectation. I think that's what we need to do.
Okay, that's fine. Good. Good point. I'm convinced. Okay, now do we want a bullet either at the end of the schools and another one at the end of roads that suggests, you know, a review and a proactive decision as to whether to continue or to sunset, right? So you're creating a review date. We're gonna, you know, whatever it is, 3 years, 5 years, we're gonna do a report card as to how this is working. And
Well, are we bound to these funds for 3 years anyway? I believe
Yes.
that's correct, isn't it? Okay, so you
That's
probably
correct.
want to say you want to review it to terminate or not based on a report after the 3rd year and for all subsequent years. In other words, you really almost have to look at this every year afterwards, because each year the select board has to vote to continue the fund. So you might as well make it an annual thing to actually look at it after the 3rd year. So,
well, okay. Interesting. So after the 3rd year, the select board has the ability to take it to 0 anyway,
yeah,
Correct.
they do.
right? We don't need to write a bullet. And
Nope.
and in fact, you know, in their proactive vote to do whatever it is that they're gonna do, that's kind of baked in there, right?
Correct.
It's the review question, though. What's the method by which they make that decision, right?
Well, so that's what this does, right? I mean, that's the whole idea is to, you know, we could even put language here prior to, here we go. We should, prior to determining, well, we should put, let me start again. This gives that annual review with a 3 to 5 year look forward, which should be done before the spending level is determined by the select board. Right? So I'm not a fan of putting a sunset clause in here because I can't see a way we do it, which is either effective or brings clarity to those who are next. But I do think that we can bring clarity to this sentence to say, this area to say, before determining the appropriation into the fund, the select board shall receive a 3 to 5 and approve a 3 to 5 year plan. Right. And that's really what we're talking about. Making sure the select board, when they make their motion to tax the residents, are doing so based on a needs analysis and a plan, not just in the ether saying, yep, we're going to do the maximum amount.
So do you want to say prior to determining the annual school fund appropriation into the fund and
I mean, it says annual funding level
and spending, you know, yeah, prior to determining each annual, right? I would change the to each. Prior to determining each annual school funding appropriation into the fund and spending appropriations out of the fund.
One second, because we say, hold on a second. This kind of says the same thing twice, does it not?
Well, you don't need each. You can say appropriations into the fund and appropriations out of the fund. Then you don't need to say each. But I would take that out of the parentheses.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
okay.
That's my suggestion.
Say that language again.
Determining annual school fund appropriations into the fund and appropriations out of the fund.
Spending appropriations out
Spending
of the fund.
appropriations, whatever the term is.
I mean, it would just, blah, blah, blah.
Actually,
Say
can I
things
make a
like-
suggestion? Prior to determining annual funding appropriations into the school fund and spending appropriations out of the school fund.
Okay.
I
Well,
think
I would just, I think this before this comma here, because we
Okay.
say this after, this is the after clause. I think this whole sentence should just be the into the,
oh, sorry.
right?
You're right. Where it says school fund appropriation, yeah, from the school fund. Yeah, in that bullet, the first time school fund appropriation shows up, it just kind of awkward that it says annual school fund appropriation. Do you want to say the annual appropriation into the uppercase school fund? Yeah.
Yeah, that in the sentence.
It becomes more symmetrical structurally.
Yeah, yeah.
Instead of items, maybe expenditures.
Oh, it's gonna be, it's gonna be plural. So.
I think that's the wording we used in other places.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, I'm good with it. So back to this, review.
There is no real review here. It's just a plan, right?
Well, it just says, yeah, before the select board can vote to fund the fund, they needed a presentation.
Yeah, but that's not a review of what either the past. That's just simply a plan going forward. It's not a review of what has happened or whether or not the fund is really needed.
Do you want to add a sentence that says the select board shall review?
I think there's got to be some review, right? Of course.
The appropriate, the appropriateness of funding level and the continuation of the fund.
Yeah, of course, right.
I mean, that is what's supposed to happen, and it's sort of implicit, but maybe you say it here.
Yeah, sure.
Just add another sentence at the end. So they've got this report, right? And now they have to undertake a review.
Yeah.
For appropriateness of funding level and continuation of the, of the fund.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess the fund is, if
Gotta
there's
do that.
cash balances in it, it's going to continue. Otherwise, they'd have to liquidate it, which I don't think is easy.
Exactly.
So the fund would continue. It's just the appropriations may not.
Something like that. Just trying to keep it in that one sentence.
it makes it really complicated. My read is that makes it really complicated. I'd rather just end with a sentence that says, look, now you've got this report, you have to read it and actually make a decision. Don't just have like a
Yeah, but but then
vote.
yeah, but we're saying the same thing twice, right? We're saying before we do any of this, you need your report,
Yeah.
right? So if we're going to say something at the end, then we take out the beginning.
Okay.
Right.
Prior to determining to continue the annual. Prior to.
I mean, this says, before you do anything, do this.
Yeah, what it doesn't say explicitly anywhere is now after you got the report, you shall do it. I mean, it's I guess it's implied, but
Yeah, I mean,
do you think we need to say it, or do you think it's clear enough?
Well, the select board has to determine this fund, right? Every
Yeah.
year it has to, or else it doesn't exist, right? So it is, the mechanism determines what has to be done. But we're saying here, before you do that, you must do this first. We can't in this thing determine what to do once they get the report. But we can say, don't determine anything until you have that report. Because if they don't do it, then if they don't fund the fund isn't funded, right? I mean, that's, so they have to make that affirmative step every year.
It's like something you might say, like using some language from the upper, from the paragraph, not from a paragraph, but just up above. It says, let me just see if I can figure it out. Prior to determining, and I have trouble reading it, but anyway, to continue the fund or determining an annual appropriation into the school fund for the upcoming fiscal year, and prior to determining the fund, to determine what I can't even read the thing here, but or may be appropriated from the school fund, the select board shall request from the town school staff a 3 to 5 year plan for the use of the school funds, including projection of blah, blah, blah. The basis of which, okay, is their decision to increase, that is to address the appropriation. It's the basis on which you determine the appropriation and use of the funds, appropriation into and use of the funds. In other words, it's giving them, it says you're getting the report to establish a basis by which you make a decision, is what I'm saying about this.
So Ralph, what if you take the tail end of the very last sentence of the bullet and put it at the beginning?
Okay, so
And
maybe
just
you'll have to, okay. So you've got what it says, this report shall be, I don't know, whatever.
See how it says, the report is supposed to address the appropriation in the use of the funds. So like I'm saying, just say that.
That sounds good, right? Yeah.
At the beginning, say that you're going to get a report. You can talk about, it being a 3 to 5 year report later. I'm just talking about a lead sentence that says that a report is going to be used to determine whether we continue the fund or
That's
how
right.
much we appropriate,
That's right.
whatever.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you describe what that report
I
is.
think that's right. Yeah.
So I didn't follow that, but what's the specific edit that is being proposed?
Maybe you say a report shall be presented on or around November 30th in the fall prior to the end of town meeting, addressing the appropriation and use of funds. I'm just using that language, but address.
Yeah, but that puts it on the town and school staff to produce this and not the select board to request it. So I guess begs the question, what happens if the select board doesn't request it? Is the staff off the hook? I don't know.
I don't know, in a normal business, you just lose your job for not producing it.
Correct.
Well, the select board could lose his job, or the town. I mean, again, if this goes to town meeting, and if there's a bunch of stuff and people can't tell us what the hell it is, here we are. You know,
Yeah.
people will say something. That's why we have this type of government.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Corey. I mean, if it's year after year, there's a tax and there's either no spend or there's silly spend.
Yeah.
There's going to be a request to end it.
I wish I thought that were true. I doubt that would work. I don't think politics works that way, but anyway.
Look, it takes 10 people to put a citizen's petition on the warrant. So
100 during special.
right.
It's the worst type of government besides all the others.
Now, is that original with you, Corey?
No, that's Benjamin Franklin or somebody, right?
Is that?
Oh man, I must be really tired, or that was really funny.
It's definitely the first.
So can we maybe change the word addressing to recommending, because addressing just seems like completely the wrong word there.
Well, here's the problem I have with it. Like the report, a 3 to 5 year report is not going to recommend things 3 to 5 years out. It's going to address the anticipated needs 3 to 5 years out. Does that?
Well, then maybe that's why this is difficult to generally, because we're looking at a plan that's 3 to 5 years out, which we're saying is going to be squishy, but we're using it to determine how much the annual appropriation is.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, you're determining your annual appropriation based on what you see on the horizon more than anything else. What you need to fund this year and whether or not you think it's going to continue. That's what's going to drive it. So it is this.
It is squishy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it suggests that what you're really looking at to fund in that year is what's on year one of your 3 to 5 year plan.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, because the 5-year plan could be to do the roofs in 3 years, and so we're not gonna spend all the money out of the money. I mean, that's the second part of it. Before you determine what to transfer out of the fund, I want to see what's coming down in 3 to 5 years. That way, we have the money to do that stuff later on, right? I think to Mike's point earlier, somewhat, or to build off of, if they fund it with 1.5 million, that does not mean they should spend all 1.5, right?
That's right.
There should be longer term requests in here that maybe require more than 1 year of funding, rather than wipe out the whole fund in 1 year.
That is correct. So your funding level may be based on a 3 to 5 year look. Your expenditure appropriations are based on the 1 year need.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
Well,
so let's go back to this paragraph and let's see what we've got. I feel like we may be over engineering it and it may actually make it worse in the end, but let's just reread this. So I guess in this bullet, do we need all these, prior to determining, or can we just say prior to determining to continue the fund, comma, or the annual appropriation into the school fund for the upcoming fiscal year, comma, or the expenditures appropriated out of the school fund, comma, the school board the select board shall request and review. Does that simplify it? I mean, I feel like just got a lot of extra words in here.
No, I like that better. I do. Yep.
You like what I just said better, Rob?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Okay, so
simpler.
prior to determining to continue the fund, comma, or the annual or the annual appropriation into the school fund for the upcoming fiscal year,
That's right. The determining doesn't need to be added, right? Yeah.
or the expenditure, or what expenditures may be appropriated. Is it what may be, or the expenditures to be appropriated? I guess they may be, or what
Maybe it's
expenditures
fine.
may be.
Yeah,
Okay,
It's
may be
conditional.
appropriate.
yeah.
Conditional.
You don't want it to be too definitive.
The select board shall request. Okay, does that work better, or did I make it worse?
Level set. Less words, so fine.
I would change from to of in the second sentence. Out of the school fund.
Yeah,
And then I would drop off the tail of the last sentence there because you already set it up above. The whole purpose of doing this is determining the appropriations and the use of funds. So we're just repeating it again.
I'm sorry, Susan, I didn't follow.
so you change the comma to a
The
period and drop
report
the
shall
rest
be
of
presented on or around November 30th and fall prior to the annual town meeting period. The up
No,
above
well, no,
said
I
the
think it's-
report was going to, that's the purpose of the report up above.
No, this references this. Right? So it needs to be presented prior to the meeting that's going to be addressing the use of the funds.
Oh. That reads really badly because that's not what I thought it was saying.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
The report is.
You want to just put a
addressing-
period after
You want to
annual
be
town meeting?
or grammatically, that's referencing the subject of the sentence, which is the report, not the annual town meeting.
Misplaced modifier.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I didn't write it.
You must have crushed the SAT, Corey. Misplaced modifier. Okay,
I'll be dropping off in 5 minutes.
okay, Michael. All right, I'm good with this. Does this get us where we need to be?
I think we're at the floor here. Yeah.
And then we just make similar changes for the roads.
Yeah.
Is it road fund or road and sidewalk fund on the ballot?
It is.
Roads and sidewalks capital stabilization fund. Roads and sidewalks. Capital stabilization fund.
What?
Did I do something wrong?
Nope, that's right.
Now, you go up in the school one, and I just want to see how it's written. Yeah, see, this one's okay. Full capital, okay. So we've conformed them, all right.
This is the select board shall have the authority.
You've got a redundant fund in the title of this one, fund, roads and sidewalks capital stabilization fund.
So it's a double fund. We get twice as much money.
It's that time of night, seeing double.
Okay.
Need an S on expense. In the second sentence.
Oh, same freaking sentence. Brian, do your magic.
What's that?
It's the same sentence, same bullet point as before. Prior to, and prior to, yeah, and prior to. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to
Just copy it and we'll change it to a road fund.
That's what I'll do.
Ryan, do you intend to take a vote tonight on these warrant articles?
No, I don't, but I mean, if others do, I mean,
I'm not recommending it. I just want to know before I
yeah,
drop.
that is not my intent. My intent is to get the policy done if possible, get it over to the select board so that they can vote it at their meeting on Thursday. And then we would vote these items once we have their final version of the policy.
Okay.
That'd be my hope.
All right, then good night, everyone. See you later.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
All right, Mike.
Okay, we still have a quorum. All right. Okay, so we got to change school funds. You know, actually, both in this paragraph and up above under school in this bullet where it says prior to determining to continue the, we should put school fund the first time fund shows up in this, and then say fund after that. Oh, I don't know. First line says school fund. You should say road fund.
All right. Eyes are failing me.
Yeah.
Been on Zooms all day.
And then in the very first clause, it says to continue the fund. Just change that to road fund. Uppercase.
And make the same change up above.
Yeah. School fund. Yep. Perfect.
Yeah, same thing here. Literally exactly what we just did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that all there is?
Yep.
And that's the end of it?
Don't say that out loud. It'll come back in the middle of the night.
Did you hit save, Corey?
What a great idea.
We've all been there.
Oh, man.
Careful, don't hit delete. It's right there. Don't hit delete.
Right. How do we file save as cap budget? Okay.
Home, isn't it?
Living
Autosave is turned off. That's terrifying.
on the edge, man.
You certainly are.
All right, I got a copy here, and it has nothing in it, so that's a problem. All right, I will be sure this gets saved. I'm not quite sure what's going on.
You got auto save on anyway, as I see it, Corey. You're in auto save, so it's being saved anyway.
No, it says autosave off.
Is it off?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
says
it says
turned
off.
off.
Yeah.
Was it off? Oh,
Yeah.
So I don't actually know where this one is saved as, though. This might have been
Well, can you just click home and?
No, I got a bunch of copies here. I will ensure that this does not get
Okay. All right. I shut. Oh, now it's gone.
Gone forever.
I took a picture of the second page, Corey. So you completely blew it. I at least have that. We can backwards engineer. Okay. So we've been at this for 3 hours. We got through this. Not sure there's anything else we need to do this evening other than get this over to the select board. if people want to attend that meeting, I can the select board meeting Thursday, I can post. Do you guys want, it doesn't obligate anyone? Do people want that option or?
You should, sure, the option is good, obviously.
Okay.
Right.
I'll go ahead and post a contemporaneous meeting. And then the question, I've got to pin down the schools hopefully for next week. The question is, do people want to take a bite at the apple on town hall? Based on whatever we've learned or whatever discussion we need to have, prior to next Monday. I mean, we could certainly do that Thursday too, but that's.
Oh, I'm out of pocket on Thursday. So
You're out of pocket Thursday, and I know you want to be part of that conversation.
So why don't you move the town hall discussion and the appropriation of 400,000 to Monday? Just move it to the Monday, right?
Okay.
Both of them.
We'll do both.
Yeah, sure.
And hopefully after Thursday, we've got final policies and we're getting closer. Okay. I don't have anything else. It's not time to take on minutes or anything of that nature. Anything else that anyone would like to raise?
No, the only thing I would say to you is I know that Jackie has been getting these notes from Elizabeth Legg that we got to get those minutes approved. She's getting very dicey about our not doing them. We've done the minutes, so they exist. It's just they're not approved. So at some point, we probably ought to put them up front and just get them approved, I think, even at the next meeting. So
yeah, so we have minutes up through the end of September into the beginning of October. The last couple of meetings we have not submitted, and yes, we do need to do those and get those submitted. Yeah. I strongly suspect that what Elizabeth is really chasing are the historical minutes, which we've outsourced back to the town. I guess they have someone that does that on an hourly, and they crank up the speed and we sound like chipmunks, and they for very inexpensively produce legally compliant minutes, as opposed to us going back and recreating all this stuff. So that I don't know if Michelle's still on. That may just be her icon. But Michelle, do you have any update on that outsourcing and whether or not that's at least in the hands of the person that's going to produce those minutes?
Yep. So that person can produce the minutes. I thought the last time we spoke is the committee members had actual notes as to what happened with the meeting, so they didn't have to watch the entire thing. And if we could get those handwritten notes in their hands, that would be best. If not, they can start watching the meetings. But they'll primarily go off of the agenda just to get the votes. So they're not watching. It's going to take them a long time to catch up with these at the rate of 3-hour meetings, right? So I think the best way to do it is look at the agenda, go off the items that should be voted, and be brief at best. But yeah, she can do that.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought it was kind of quick and efficient, was already in process. And I honestly don't know how much we can gather in terms of historical notes.
Michelle, I would just have go from the agendas and chipmunk the meetings, and we need to get the votes recorded. I mean, that's the thing that absolutely needs to be recorded. The notes and the other minutia, obviously important as well, but having the votes recorded is really the legal thing that we're in trouble with. So
okay. So I will have a conversation with her tomorrow. I'll provide all the agendas to her and ask her to start. Would you like her to start with the most recent and go back, or start with the
oldest and go forward? Because we've got the last 5 or 6. I think we've handled 3.
Yeah, we're not terribly out of date from August onwards. I mean, we might be, I don't know, a week or 2 behind, but that's not the issue. It's really the 12 months prior to that. So last STM, last ATM. The good news is that we really don't vote until we get pretty close to a warrant deadline. Because there's a prioritization that has to take place, even if we like, even if people are ready to support a project, it's pretty rare we vote a project until we've got all the projects vetted. And then we force the prioritization. So it comes pretty late.
And I can say, I did look back, and Michael Dick did take some great notes. And I do have a lot of those because he was sending them out to the group
Oh, great.
after each meeting.
Okay.
I'm just summarizing some of the things and some of the items that were voted on. So I do have all of those. So that will help her. But let me have a conversation with her tomorrow and see what kind of time frame we're looking at to get these all done.
Okay. And to Corey's point, we may want to focus on the voting windows first. If that's really the primary legal requirement. I mean, we only vote, a couple of meetings a year. That's the reality.
Okay, well, I'll have her focus on that.
Okay. All right. Well, Ralph, thank you for raising that because obviously it was caught in limbo, and I would not have known had you not raised the question.
Yep, and I'll have the minutes for last three ready before our next one, so we'll wrap those up for the meeting.
All right. Anything else, or would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second? Susan?
Second,
Thank you. All in favor, roll call vote. Corey Evans,
Ravens eye.
Susan Franklin,
Susan Franklin, I.
Brian Host, aye, and Ralph. Thumbs up. All right. Super.